You have been taught to believe that love is something you must earn, that people will only keep you close when you are useful, strong, generous, available, impressive, or easy to need. But if that were true, why do so many people who give everything still go to sleep feeling unwanted? Why do you still feel afraid that the moment you have nothing left to offer, your place in someone's heart will disappear? The truth is, you are worthy of love even when you have nothing to give. Even when your hands are empty, your energy is gone, your smile feels heavy, and your heart is too tired to prove anything. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that your value is not measured by what you produce, what you fix, what you carry, or how much pain you hide for other people. Beneath all the exhaustion, beneath all the shame, beneath the fear of being a burden, there is still a quiet life inside you that deserves tenderness. Not because it performs perfectly, but because it exists. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, something in you will begin to unclench. The old belief that you must be useful to be loved will start to lose its power. Your breathing will slow, your mind will soften, and the part of you that has been begging to rest will finally hear the truth it has needed for so long. You are not loved because you never run empty. You are worthy of love even when you do. This is not just another teaching to fall asleep to. This is a gentle return to the truth you forgot about yourself. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something painful happens when a person spends too many years believing they must always be useful to deserve love. At first, it looks like kindness, responsibility, generosity, strength. But little by little, the soul becomes exhausted from constantly asking the same silent question: if I stop giving, will anyone still stay? That question has broken more hearts than most people realize, and tonight, we are going to uncover the hidden pain behind measuring your worth by usefulness, because many people spend their entire lives serving others without ever learning how to simply exist without guilt. There are people who feel uncomfortable resting, not because they enjoy suffering, but because deep inside they have connected rest with failure. They only feel valuable when they are solving problems, helping someone, carrying emotional weight, fixing situations, or sacrificing their own peace to make life easier for everyone else. The moment they stop being needed, anxiety begins to appear. Silence starts to feel dangerous. Stillness becomes uncomfortable. This is one of the quietest forms of suffering in the modern world, because from the outside, these people often look admirable. They are dependable, hard-working, always available, always caring. Everyone praises them for being selfless. But underneath that image is often a frightened person who secretly believes they must earn their right to be loved every single day. Buddhist wisdom teaches something very different. It teaches that attachment creates suffering, and one of the deepest attachments a person can develop is attachment to usefulness. Not attachment to money, not attachment to possessions, attachment to being needed. Because when your identity becomes tied to being useful, you stop knowing who you are without constant effort. You stop resting naturally. You stop receiving love freely. Every relationship quietly becomes a performance. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to prove your value. This is why some people feel guilty when others help them. Have you noticed that? Someone offers kindness, and instead of relaxing, they panic. They immediately try to repay the favor. They apologize for needing support. They rush to explain themselves. They become uncomfortable receiving care without earning it first. That discomfort usually did not appear overnight. It often begins very early in life. Some children grow up feeling loved only when they behave perfectly. Some only receive attention when they achieve something impressive. Others become emotional caretakers for their parents long before they are old enough to understand their own emotions. Slowly, the child learns a dangerous lesson. My value comes from what I do for others. And once that belief enters the mind, it follows the person everywhere. They become adults who overwork themselves to exhaustion, because slowing down makes them feel worthless. They become partners who constantly overgive because they are terrified of abandonment. They become friends who always listen but never speak honestly about their own pain because they fear becoming too much. They become the person everyone depends on while secretly feeling emotionally starved themselves. The tragic part is that many people never recognize this pattern because society rewards it. People applaud exhaustion. They praise overworking. They admire people who sacrifice themselves endlessly for others. Very few people stop and ask, "But are you okay?" And sometimes the person themselves no longer knows the answer. There are people walking around today who cannot even relax during a single peaceful evening because their nervous system has become addicted to productivity. If they are not accomplishing something, helping someone, cleaning something, fixing something, or worrying about something, they feel anxious. The mind immediately whispers, "You are wasting time. You should be doing more." But a human being was never meant to live like a machine. Buddhism reminds us that suffering often comes from illusion, and one of the greatest illusions is believing your existence must constantly be justified. A flower does not apologize for blooming slowly. The moon does not earn its place in the sky. A child does not need to perform miracles to deserve tenderness. Yet somewhere along the way, many people begin believing that their humanity alone is not enough. So they start building an identity around usefulness because usefulness feels safer than vulnerability. Think about how often people say things like, "At least I can still help," or "I just want to be useful." On the surface, those words sound noble, but underneath them is often fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of becoming unwanted, fear that if they stop giving, people will stop loving them. This fear becomes especially painful during difficult seasons of life. Illness, grief, burnout, depression, unemployment, aging, heartbreak, or emotional exhaustion can suddenly remove a person's ability to constantly give. And when that happens, many people experience a deep identity crisis. Not only are they suffering emotionally, but they also begin questioning whether they still deserve love at all. This is why some people isolate themselves when they are struggling. They do not want others to see them weak, tired, or emotionally broken. They feel ashamed for not being productive, ashamed for needing support, ashamed for not being useful enough. But needing help does not make you less worthy. One of the saddest things in the world is watching someone apologize for their pain as if their suffering is an inconvenience to others. You can hear it in the way people speak. "Sorry for bothering you. Sorry for being emotional. Sorry for needing help. Sorry for not being myself lately." As if being human requires permission. The Buddha taught compassion not because humans are perfect, but because humans suffer. Compassion was never designed only for the strong, cheerful, successful versions of people. Real compassion exists precisely for the moments when someone feels broken, exhausted, confused, or lost. But when you measure your worth by usefulness, compassion becomes difficult to receive. You start believing people only care about you when you are functioning well. You become afraid that your struggles will disappoint others, so instead of resting, you push harder. Instead of asking for help, you hide. Instead of slowing down, you overperform. And eventually, the body begins to carry what the heart refuses to admit. Chronic exhaustion, anxiety, emotional numbness, quiet resentment, burnout. These are often the consequences of living as though your worth depends on endless giving. There are people who smile constantly while secretly feeling emotionally empty because they have spent years taking care of everyone except themselves. They know how to comfort others, but they do not know how to comfort their own heart. They know how to give affection, but receiving affection feels foreign. They know how to stay strong for everyone else, but they have forgotten how to be soft with themselves. And the painful irony is that many of these people are deeply lovable, not because of what they do, not because of what they provide, but because of who they are. Yet they cannot feel this truth because their mind has become trapped in a transactional understanding of love. They believe love must always be exchanged for performance. I must stay impressive. I must stay needed. I must stay useful. I must not become a burden. That last fear controls countless lives. The fear of becoming a burden causes people to hide their emotions for years. It causes them to suffer silently. It causes them to pretend they are okay when they are barely holding themselves together inside. Some people would rather collapse privately than inconvenience others publicly. And while that may look like strength from the outside, it is often deep loneliness. Buddhist teachings encourage us to observe the mind carefully because the mind creates stories that are not always true. One of those stories says, "If I cannot give, I do not deserve to receive." But that is not wisdom. That is fear wearing the mask of responsibility. A truly loving relationship is not built only on usefulness. Real love survives seasons where one person is weak. Real love allows rest. Real love does not disappear the moment someone becomes emotionally tired, financially struggling, physically sick, or mentally overwhelmed. And yet, many people have never experienced that kind of love consistently, so they spend their lives trying to secure affection through service. They become addicted to being the reliable one. But carrying that identity forever becomes heavy, very heavy, because eventually life humbles everyone. Even the strongest people become exhausted sometimes. Even the caretakers need comfort. Even the cheerful person has nights where they feel empty. Even the one who holds everyone together sometimes wants someone to hold them. There is no shame in that. One Buddhist teaching says that clinging creates suffering because nothing in life stays permanent. Strength changes, energy changes, circumstances change, productivity changes. If your entire self-worth is built on what you can produce, then your identity will constantly collapse every time life becomes difficult. That is why inner worth must exist deeper than performance. Otherwise, every setback feels like proof that you are failing as a human being. And many people are trapped in exactly that cycle right now. The moment they become less productive, they feel guilty. The moment they rest, they feel lazy. The moment they need support, they feel weak. The moment they disappoint someone, they feel worthless. This is not peace. This is emotional imprisonment. And the mind can stay trapped there for decades. Some people reach old age without ever learning how to feel worthy while simply sitting still. Think about how heartbreaking that is. A person can spend an entire lifetime chasing approval through usefulness without ever discovering that their existence alone already carried value from the beginning. That is why Buddhist self-worth is so different from modern self-worth. Modern culture often says, "You are valuable because you are successful." Buddhist wisdom says, "You are valuable because you are alive." One approach creates endless pressure, the other creates peace, and peace is what so many exhausted hearts are secretly searching for. Not more achievement, not more praise, not more performance, just peace. The kind of peace that allows you to rest without guilt, the kind of peace that allows you to say, "I am struggling," without shame. The kind of peace that allows you to receive kindness without feeling like you owe your soul in return. The kind of peace that reminds you that being loved is not a prize for perfect behavior. Many people do not realize how deeply they fear unconditional love because unconditional love feels unfamiliar. They are more comfortable earning affection than simply receiving it. Earning feels predictable, safe, controlled. But being loved while tired, imperfect, emotional, or vulnerable feels terrifying because it challenges the old belief that love must always be deserved. And this is where healing begins. Healing begins the moment you stop asking, "What can I give to deserve love?" and start asking, "Why did I believe my existence alone was not enough?" That question changes everything. because often beneath the endless productivity and overgiving is simply a wounded human being trying to avoid rejection, a person who learned early that usefulness protected them from abandonment, a person who became emotionally valuable before they ever learned how to feel emotionally safe, a person who confused being needed with being loved. But those two things are not the same. People can need your labor without loving your soul. People can depend on your strength without caring for your heart. And sometimes the hardest spiritual lesson is realizing that exhausting yourself for others will never finally convince you that you deserve love. Because the wound was never about productivity in the first place. It was about worthiness, and worthiness cannot be earned through suffering. The Buddha often spoke about compassion beginning within, not selfishness, not arrogance, compassion, a gentle recognition that your pain matters too, your exhaustion matters too, your humanity matters too. You do not have to become emotionally perfect before deserving tenderness. You do not have to constantly perform usefulness to earn your place in the world. You do not have to spend your entire life proving that you are worthy of staying loved. There is already something sacred inside you beneath the performance, beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the need to constantly earn your existence. And the more deeply you understand that truth, the more peacefully you will begin to live. Because eventually your soul becomes tired of carrying relationships that only survive when you are overgiving. Eventually your heart longs for something softer, something quieter, something real, a love that says you can rest here, a love that does not disappear the moment you become human, and perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. You were never placed on this earth to become a machine for other people's comfort. You were not born merely to perform usefulness until exhaustion swallowed your spirit whole. Beneath all the striving, all the proving, and all the fear of not being enough, there is still a human being quietly waiting to discover what it feels like to be loved without conditions. And that discovery can change an entire life. Slowly, a painful realization begins to appear. Many people are not only exhausted from trying to be useful, they are exhausted from trying to be good enough to deserve love. Somewhere deep inside, they began believing that affection must be earned through perfect behavior, constant patience, endless sacrifice, or never making mistakes. And that belief quietly destroys peace from the inside. Because when love feels conditional, the heart never fully relaxes. A person who believes love is a reward for good behavior spends their entire life afraid of disappointing others. They become careful with every word, every emotion, every mistake. They monitor themselves constantly, hoping that if they stay kind enough, helpful enough, calm enough, successful enough, then maybe they will finally feel safe inside someone's heart. But tonight, we are going to uncover why love was never meant to function like a payment system, because many people have spent years trying to buy affection with perfection, while secretly feeling terrified of being truly seen. There is a deep sadness that comes from believing you must always behave correctly to deserve closeness. It creates a kind of invisible tension inside the body. Even during moments of connection, the mind stays alert. It whispers things like, do not upset them, do not be difficult, do not ask for too much, do not show the messy parts of yourself. And slowly, love stops feeling safe. It begins to feel like a test. This is why some people become emotionally exhausted, even in relationships that look peaceful from the outside. They are constantly trying to maintain approval, constantly trying to avoid rejection, constantly trying to remain lovable through performance. The Buddha taught that attachment to approval creates suffering because the mind becomes dependent on external validation for inner stability. Instead of feeling grounded within yourself, your emotional safety becomes controlled by how others respond to you. If people praise you, you feel worthy. If people criticize you, you feel ashamed. If people stay, you feel safe. If people pull away, you panic. This creates a fragile emotional life because your sense of worth is constantly moving with other people's opinions. And when love becomes connected to behavior, many people start losing contact with their authentic self. They become the version of themselves that feels safest to others. The agreeable version, the calm version, the helpful version, the emotionally easy version. But underneath that carefully controlled image is often a human being who feels deeply unseen. Because real intimacy cannot grow where authenticity is constantly hidden. Think about how many people learned very early in life that mistakes created emotional distance. Some children were only treated warmly when they behaved perfectly. Some received affection only when they achieved something. Others learned that expressing sadness, anger, fear, or frustration caused punishment, silence, criticism, or withdrawal. So the child slowly adapts. I must stay good. I must stay easy. I must not upset anyone. And eventually, that survival strategy becomes an identity. The problem is that human beings are not designed to remain emotionally perfect forever. Everyone gets tired. Everyone struggles. Everyone experiences difficult emotions. Everyone disappoints someone eventually. But when love feels tied to behavior, mistakes begin to feel dangerous. Even small conflicts can trigger overwhelming fear because deep inside, the person is not only afraid of disagreement, they are afraid of losing love itself. This is why some people apologize constantly, even when they have done nothing wrong. Their nervous system has learned that approval equals safety, so they try to restore harmony immediately, even at the cost of abandoning their own feelings. Have you noticed how some people say sorry for everything? Sorry for talking too much. Sorry for being emotional. Sorry for needing reassurance. Sorry for existing loudly. These apologies are often not about politeness. They come from fear. Fear that taking up emotional space might make them less lovable. And this fear can quietly shape entire lives. There are people who stay silent during painful relationships because they believe expressing needs will push others away. There are people who tolerate disrespect because they are terrified of abandonment. There are people who suppress their real personality because they learned authenticity was risky. And after many years, they no longer know where the performance ends and the real self begins. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when we cling to false identities. One of the most painful false identities is the perfect, lovable person. Because perfection is impossible, the mind remains trapped in endless anxiety, trying to maintain an image that no human being can sustain forever. And the exhaustion becomes overwhelming. Some people become so addicted to being emotionally good that they lose touch with their natural emotions completely. They smile while grieving. They comfort others while falling apart internally. They remain patient while secretly drowning in resentment, not because they are fake people, but because they are afraid that honesty will cost them love. This creates a heartbreaking loneliness because even when people care about them, they cannot fully feel safe receiving that care. Deep down, they suspect the love only exists because they are behaving correctly. So they keep performing, keep pleasing, keep adjusting, keep shrinking parts of themselves. But real love cannot grow where fear controls the relationship. Love was never meant to feel like walking on emotional glass. And yet many people have never experienced anything else. Some relationships unintentionally reinforce this fear. Affection becomes warmer when the person is useful, cheerful, successful, or accommodating. Distance appears when they are struggling emotionally, setting boundaries, or expressing difficult feelings. Over time, the mind forms a painful conclusion. I am easier to love when I suppress myself. That belief can become deeply rooted, and once it does, even healthy relationships can feel uncomfortable because unconditional care feels unfamiliar. It can feel strange when someone remains kind during your difficult moments. It can feel confusing when someone stays patient while you are imperfect. It can even feel suspicious when someone loves you without requiring constant performance in return, because the nervous system has spent years preparing for emotional punishment. The Buddha often encouraged people to observe their suffering gently, not with shame, but with awareness. When you begin observing the fear beneath people-pleasing, beneath perfectionism, beneath emotional over-control, you often discover a simple human longing underneath all of it, the longing to be loved without conditions, not because you are always calm, not because you never fail, not because you never struggle, but because your humanity itself matters. This realization can feel almost revolutionary for someone who has spent their whole life earning affection. At first, the mind resists it. It says, "Surely I must still prove myself somehow." But true compassion does not disappear the moment someone becomes difficult, emotional, tired, anxious, grieving, or imperfect. Real love is not a reward system. And this is something many wounded hearts desperately need to hear. Love is not payment for obedience. Love is not a prize for emotional perfection. Love is not something you purchase through endless self-sacrifice. Because if affection only exists when you are performing well, then it is not truly safe love. It is conditional approval. And conditional approval keeps the nervous system in constant fear. This is why many people feel deeply anxious before difficult conversations. Their body is not simply afraid of conflict. It is afraid that conflict might remove connection entirely. Some people would rather abandon their own truth than risk losing closeness. So they become shapeshifters emotionally. Around one person, they become quieter. Around another, more cheerful. Around another, more agreeable. They carefully study what version of themselves feels most acceptable. But constantly adapting for survival slowly disconnects a person from inner peace, because the soul becomes exhausted from hiding. There is a Buddhist teaching that says attachment creates illusion, and one painful illusion is the belief that love must constantly be maintained through flawless behavior. But human relationships are naturally imperfect because human beings themselves are imperfect. No one remains emotionally balanced all the time. No one avoids mistakes forever. No one speaks perfectly every moment of their life. And yet many people secretly expect themselves to achieve impossible emotional purity before deserving compassion. This creates enormous self-hatred. The moment they become angry, they feel guilty. The moment they become emotional, they feel ashamed. The moment they disappoint someone, they feel worthless. Instead of treating mistakes as part of being human, they treat mistakes as proof they are unlovable. And this inner punishment becomes relentless. Some people cannot rest after conflict because their mind immediately spirals into self-condemnation. They replay conversations repeatedly. They analyze every word. They panic over whether someone is upset with them, not because they are weak, but because love has become psychologically connected to performance. This is one reason why Buddhist compassion is so powerful. Compassion interrupts the cycle of self-punishment. It reminds you that being imperfect does not remove your worth. You can make mistakes and still deserve kindness. You can struggle emotionally and still deserve patience. You can fail and still deserve care. You can be healing and still deserve love. Many people intellectually understand these ideas, but emotionally they still live inside fear. The body remembers old emotional wounds long after the mind understands them logically. That is why healing takes gentleness. A person cannot shame themselves into feeling worthy, and yet countless people try. They become extremely harsh with themselves because they believe self-criticism will finally make them lovable enough. They push themselves harder. They monitor their emotions more strictly. They try to become easier, quieter, calmer, more productive, less needy. But no amount of self-punishment creates inner peace. It only creates deeper exhaustion. And eventually many people reach a breaking point where they realize they can no longer survive by constantly performing emotional perfection. The mask becomes too heavy, the loneliness becomes too painful, the nervous system becomes too tired, and strangely enough, that breaking point can become the beginning of healing, because sometimes the soul becomes so exhausted from pretending that it finally begins craving truth more than approval. Truth sounds different. Truth says, I am struggling. Truth says, I feel hurt. Truth says, I cannot carry everything anymore. Truth says, I deserve care even when I am not at my best. That last sentence is incredibly difficult for many people to believe, because deep inside they still fear becoming disappointing. But disappointment is part of every human relationship. No one lives an entire life without frustrating, hurting, misunderstanding, or disappointing another person sometimes. This does not make someone unworthy of love. It makes them human. The Buddha never taught perfection as the path to peace. He taught awareness, compassion, and liberation from attachment. And attachment to approval traps many people in emotional suffering for decades. Some people are so focused on earning love that they never pause long enough to ask a painful question. If I have to constantly perform to keep someone's affection, do I actually feel emotionally safe with them? That question can change everything, because safe love allows humanity. Safe love allows difficult seasons. Safe love allows imperfection. Safe love allows rest. It does not require you to constantly audition for your place in someone's heart. And perhaps one of the saddest truths is that many people have never experienced this kind of emotional safety before, so they continue confusing anxiety with love. They continue believing emotional exhaustion is normal inside relationships. But love was never supposed to feel like permanent fear. Real love softens the nervous system. Real love allows honesty. Real love creates space for vulnerability instead of punishing it. And most importantly, real love does not disappear every time you fail to behave perfectly. This does not mean relationships never require accountability. Of course they do. Buddhism does not encourage harming others carelessly. Compassion includes responsibility. But responsibility is different from believing your worth disappears the moment you make mistakes. One mindset says, I made a mistake. The other says, I am a mistake. And many wounded people unconsciously live inside the second belief. That belief creates enormous suffering because it turns every human flaw into evidence of personal unworthiness. But your worth is deeper than your worst moment, deeper than your emotional struggles, deeper than your imperfections, deeper than your fear. And healing begins when you slowly stop treating love like something that must constantly be earned through emotional obedience. Because you were never meant to spend your entire life trying to become good enough for tenderness. You were never meant to live terrified that one wrong emotion would make you undeserving of care. You were never meant to confuse silence with safety or self-erasure with love. The heart cannot thrive where it must constantly hide itself to survive. Eventually, something inside begins longing for freedom. Freedom to speak honestly. Freedom to rest emotionally. Freedom to exist imperfectly without panic. Freedom to be human without fearing abandonment every time you struggle. And that freedom becomes possible the moment you begin understanding a deeper truth. Love was never supposed to be payment for perfect behavior. Real love sees your humanity and stays gentle anyway, not because you earned it flawlessly, but because your existence itself carries worth far beyond performance. Once the heart begins to understand that love is not a reward for perfect behavior, another quiet truth starts rising to the surface. Many people are not actually afraid of being unloved because they have nothing inside them. They are afraid because for most of their lives they were only treated warmly when somebody needed something from them. That kind of pain is confusing. It can make a person mistake demand for affection, responsibility for closeness, and dependence for love. So tonight, we have to look gently at one of the deepest wounds many people carry, the Buddhist difference between being needed and being loved. There is a kind of loneliness that hides inside usefulness. It does not always look like loneliness from the outside. In fact, it can look like being surrounded by people. Your phone may ring, people may call your name, someone may ask for your advice, your money, your strength, your time, your patience, your emotional support, your ability to fix what they do not want to face. From the outside, it may look like you matter to everyone, but deep inside, a painful question may still remain. Do they love me, or do they only need what I do for them? That question can sit quietly in the chest for years. It often appears in people who have spent most of their lives being the dependable one, the one who shows up, the one who listens, the one who carries the family problems, the one who remembers everyone's pain but rarely has their own pain remembered, the one who is praised for strength but secretly wishes someone would notice the tiredness behind that strength. At first, being needed can feel meaningful. It can feel like proof that you have value. Someone depends on you, so you feel important. Someone calls you first, so you feel chosen. Someone cannot manage without you, so you feel secure. But over time, if being needed becomes the only way you feel connected, the soul begins to suffer. Because being needed is not the same as being loved. Being needed often says, I want what you can provide. Being loved says, I care about who you are, even when you cannot provide anything. Being needed can disappear when your usefulness disappears. Being loved remains gentle, even when your hands are empty. And this difference matters deeply because many wounded people build their entire identity around being necessary. They become frightened of becoming optional. They fear the day nobody needs them anymore because deep inside they believe that if they are not needed, they will not be wanted. Buddhist wisdom invites us to see this clearly. It teaches that suffering often comes from attachment, and one powerful attachment is the attachment to being necessary in other people's lives. The mind clings to the role of helper, rescuer, provider, fixer, comforter, or strong one because that role seems to protect us from abandonment. But any identity built on fear will eventually become a prison. When you are attached to being needed, you may struggle to let people grow without you. You may feel anxious when others become independent. You may feel forgotten when nobody asks for help. You may even feel empty when life becomes peaceful, because peace removes the emergency that once gave you a sense of purpose. This is why some people unconsciously keep themselves busy with other people's problems. Not because they love chaos, but because chaos gives them a role. And having a role feels safer than sitting alone with the question, who am I when nobody needs me? That question can feel frightening, because if you were loved mainly for being useful, silence can feel like rejection. Rest can feel like invisibility. Other people's independence can feel like abandonment. You may begin to believe that your importance depends on staying necessary, but Buddhist self-worth teaches that your value is not created by someone else's dependence on you. Your worth does not rise because someone needs you, and it does not fall because someone can manage without you. You are not less worthy when people stop asking. You are not less lovable when people no longer require your strength. You are not disappearing simply because you are not being used. This is a very hard truth for the heart to accept when it has spent years surviving through usefulness. Some people only feel calm when they are giving. They do not know what to do with love that does not ask for a service. They feel uncomfortable when someone says, just come. You do not have to bring anything. You do not have to help. I just want you there. A sentence like that can touch a wound so deep that it almost hurts, because the soul suddenly realizes how rarely it has been wanted without a function. There are people who have been invited into rooms only because they are helpful. They are remembered when there is a problem, but forgotten when there is joy. They are called when someone needs comfort, but not when someone wants companionship. They are praised when they sacrifice, but ignored when they are tired. That kind of life can quietly teach the heart to expect extraction instead of affection. So when real love appears, the person may not trust it. They may think, "What do you really want from me?" They may think, "Why are you being kind if I have done nothing?" They may think, "How long before you ask for something?" This suspicion does not mean they are ungrateful. It means they have been trained by experience to connect closeness with demand. Their nervous system has learned that affection often comes with a hidden invoice. But true love does not arrive with a bill. True love does not make you feel like you are constantly being measured for usefulness. It does not only appear when you are productive, generous, attractive, cheerful, successful, or convenient. It does not make you feel like your place is temporary unless you keep performing. True love has a different feeling. It gives the body room to breathe. It does not rush to take from you. It does not panic when you rest. It does not punish you for having limits. It does not reduce you to what you can do. Buddhist compassion sees the person beneath the role. This is important because roles can become masks. The good child, the reliable friend, the strong parent, the perfect partner, the wise advisor, the generous helper. These roles may bring praise, but praise is not the same as intimacy. People can admire your role while never truly meeting your heart. And many people are starving, not because nobody praises them, but because nobody sees them beyond what they provide. They are tired of being called strong when they actually want to be held softly. They are tired of being called kind when they secretly need kindness too. They are tired of being called dependable when they feel like collapsing. They are tired of being needed by everyone and known by almost no one. This is the hidden wound we must name. Being needed can make you feel important, but being loved makes you feel safe. Importance can still be lonely. Safety feels like home. When someone needs you, they may become attached to your function. When someone loves you, they become tender toward your being. They notice your silence. They care about your rest. They ask how you are, not just what you can do. They do not only come close when they are empty. They also come close when they want to share joy, peace, laughter, and simple presence. In Buddhist teaching, love is connected to compassion, loving kindness, and freedom from clinging. Real love does not clutch another person as an object of use. It does not say, "You must stay exactly this way so I can feel comfortable." It does not turn another human being into an emotional tool. Real love has spaciousness. It allows people to breathe. It allows people to change. It allows people to have needs of their own. It allows people to say no without becoming worthless. This is where being needed and being loved separate clearly. Need often becomes possessive. It says, "Do not change because I depend on this version of you." Love says, "I want your well-being, even when your growth changes the role you play in my life." That is a rare kind of love. Many people have never been loved that way, so they keep choosing relationships where they are useful instead of cherished. They choose people who depend on them because dependence feels familiar. They feel anxious around people who do not demand anything because they do not know how to be present without performing. This is why healing may feel strange at first. When you begin stepping out of the role of being constantly needed, you may feel guilty. You may feel selfish. You may feel like you are abandoning people. But sometimes what you are abandoning is not love. Sometimes you are abandoning the belief that you must be endlessly available to deserve connection. There is a difference. Compassion does not mean allowing yourself to be drained until nothing is left. Buddhism teaches the middle way, not self-destruction. It invites kindness toward others, but also awareness toward yourself. If your giving is fueled by fear, resentment, or the terror of being unloved, then your giving is no longer free. It has become a survival strategy, and survival strategies are heavy. A person can spend years saying yes, while their heart quietly says, Please notice that I am tired. They can keep helping while secretly hoping someone will finally tell them, you do not have to earn your place here. They can become so used to being useful that they do not recognize their own emotional hunger anymore. This is why the question matters. Are you loved or are you only needed? Not to make you bitter, not to make you suspicious of everyone, but to help you see clearly where your soul is being nourished and where it is only being consumed. Buddhist awareness is not harsh. It does not ask you to hate people who need you. Need is part of human life. We all need one another. A baby needs care. A sick person needs support. A grieving friend needs presence. A tired partner may need help. There is nothing wrong with need itself. The problem begins when need replaces love. The problem begins when people only value you when they are taking from you. The problem begins when your exhaustion is ignored because your usefulness is convenient. The problem begins when you are made to feel guilty for having limits. The problem begins when your humanity is treated as less important than your function. This is why some relationships feel draining even when there is no obvious cruelty. Nobody may shout, nobody may insult you, nobody may openly reject you, but you still leave feeling empty because the relationship is built around what you give, not who you are. Your body often knows before your mind does. You may notice heaviness after certain conversations. You may feel tense when a person's name appears on your phone. You may feel like you must prepare yourself before seeing them. You may feel relief when plans are cancelled. These feelings are not random. Sometimes the body is whispering, this connection takes more than it returns. That does not mean you must abandon everyone, but it does mean you should pay attention. Buddhist practice begins with noticing. Noticing where you overgive. Noticing where you fear saying no. Noticing where you confuse guilt with compassion. Noticing where you feel loved only when you are useful. Noticing where you are afraid to rest because people may no longer need you. This noticing is not meant to shame you. It is meant to wake you up gently, because once you see the pattern, you can begin to loosen it. You can begin asking yourself, would this person still care about me if I could not help them right now? You can ask, do I feel safe being honest here? You can ask, can I be tired in this relationship? You can ask, does this connection allow me to exist beyond my usefulness? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they are powerful. They reveal where love is real and where attachment is disguised as affection. In Buddhism, attachment often says, I want you because you satisfy something in me. Loving kindness says, may you be well, even beyond what you do for me. That difference is everything. Attachment grabs, love blesses. Attachment consumes, love protects. Attachment fears your freedom, love honors your wholeness. When someone is attached to needing you, they may become upset when you set boundaries. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because your boundary interrupts their access to you. They may call you selfish. They may act wounded. They may remind you of everything they have done. They may make you feel guilty for choosing rest. But a boundary does not destroy love. A boundary reveals the quality of love. If a connection only survives when you abandon yourself, then what is being protected may not be love. It may be control, convenience, or emotional dependence. That truth can hurt, but it can also free you. Because the moment you stop confusing being needed with being loved, you begin to reclaim your inner life. You stop measuring your value by how much others rely on you. You stop chasing exhaustion as proof of importance. You stop feeling invisible when nobody is asking for something. You begin discovering a quieter worth, a worth that exists when the phone is silent, a worth that remains when you are resting, a worth that does not need an emergency to feel real. This is especially important for people who were taught to be caregivers too early. Some children became the emotional support system of their homes. They learned to read moods, prevent conflict, comfort adults, stay quiet, stay helpful, stay easy. They became useful before they were allowed to be carefree. And later in life they may confuse love with emotional responsibility. They may feel most comfortable in relationships where they are managing someone else's feelings. They may feel anxious when others are upset, even if they did nothing wrong. They may feel responsible for keeping everyone stable. But love does not require you to become the manager of another person's entire emotional world. You can care without carrying everything. You can support without disappearing. You can be compassionate without becoming responsible for every wound around you. This is a deeply Buddhist lesson, because compassion without wisdom becomes exhaustion. Wisdom helps compassion remain healthy. It teaches you that every being has their own path, their own karma, their own lessons, their own inner work. You may help, but you cannot live another person's life for them. You may love, but you cannot become the ground beneath every step they take. Trying to do so will only break you. And when you are broken from overgiving, you may begin resenting the very people you love. That resentment often frightens kind people. They think resentment means they are bad, but often resentment is simply the heart saying, "I have been ignoring my limits for too long." Resentment is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is a signal that giving has stopped being free, a signal that love has become duty without nourishment, a signal that being needed has swallowed being known. When you listen to that signal with gentleness, you can begin making changes before bitterness hardens inside you. You may begin by pausing before saying yes. You may begin by letting people solve problems they are capable of solving. You may begin by sharing your real feelings instead of always being the comforting one. You may begin by allowing silence without rushing to fill it with usefulness. These small changes may feel uncomfortable because they challenge an old identity. But slowly, you begin to discover that you can still be worthy when you are not performing. You can still belong when you are not rescuing. You can still be loved when you are not being useful. And the people who truly love you will not require your self-abandonment as proof of devotion. They may need time to adjust. They may not always understand at first. But real love has room for your humanity. Real love can survive your limits. Real love does not demand that you remain exhausted so others can remain comfortable. This is why Buddhist self-worth is not cold or selfish. It does not say, "Stop caring about others." It says, "Care without losing yourself." It says, "Give from fullness, not fear." It says, "Let compassion include the one who is doing the giving." That last part is where many people struggle. They can send compassion outward easily, but when compassion turns inward, they resist it. They feel undeserving. They think their needs are less important. They think rest must be justified. They think love must be earned. But if all beings deserve compassion, then you are not excluded from that truth. You are also a being. You also suffer. You also need gentleness. You also deserve care that is not based only on what you can provide. This understanding can begin healing the ache of being needed but not truly loved. Because the first place where you must stop using yourself is inside your own mind. You must stop treating yourself like a tool. Stop measuring your day only by what you accomplished. Stop asking whether you earned rest. Stop seeing your tiredness as failure. You are not an object of service. You are a living person. And living persons need more than usefulness. They need tenderness, presence, honesty, quiet, joy, and room to simply be. When you start honoring this, your relationships may begin to change. Some connections may deepen because you finally allow yourself to be known. Others may weaken because they were built mainly on access to your energy. That can hurt, but it can also reveal the truth. Not every person who needs you loves you deeply, and not every person who loves you needs you constantly. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who want you free, rested, whole, and honest. They do not want you drained. They do not want you disappearing into service. They do not want your smile if it costs your soul. They want your real presence. And real presence cannot exist where you are only performing a role. So maybe the healing begins here, not by rejecting everyone who needs you, but by refusing to confuse need with love, not by closing your heart, but by opening your eyes, not by becoming hard, but by becoming wise. Because wisdom teaches you to recognize the difference between people who come to your well only to draw water and people who also care whether the well is running dry. That difference can save your life. The heart deserves relationships where it is not only useful, but cherished. Where it is not only called during crisis, but remembered in peace. Where it is not only praised for strength, but allowed to be tender. Where it is not only needed for survival, but loved for simply being. And as this truth settles deeper inside you, something begins to soften. You no longer have to chase importance through exhaustion. You no longer have to keep proving that your presence has value. You no longer have to fear becoming unnecessary, because your worth was never created by another person's need. You can be needed and still not loved. You can be loved and not constantly needed. And the most healing love of all is the one that looks at you when you have nothing to give and still says, "Stay. Your presence is enough." And once you begin to see the difference between being needed and being loved, something even deeper becomes clear. Many people are not giving from freedom. They are giving from fear. They are not helping because their heart is full. They are helping because they are terrified that if they stop, the affection around them will disappear. That is where exhaustion becomes more than tiredness. It becomes a language. It becomes a way of saying, "Please see me, please keep me, please do not leave me." And tonight, we need to speak gently about how to stop earning affection through exhaustion, because a life built on constant self-draining may look loving from the outside, but inside it slowly teaches the heart that rest is dangerous. There is a kind of tiredness sleep does not fix. It sits deeper than the body. You wake up after resting, but something in you is still heavy. Your eyes open, but your spirit feels like it has not been held in years. This is not ordinary fatigue. This is the exhaustion of constantly trying to remain lovable. And many people live there without naming it. They think they are just busy. They think they are just responsible. They think they are simply doing what good people do. But beneath the errands, the favors, the emotional labor, the late-night listening, the unpaid sacrifices, the silent forgiveness, and the forced smiles, there is often a hidden fear whispering, "If I do less, I will be loved less." That fear can run an entire life. It can decide how much you give. It can decide how often you say yes. It can decide how quickly you answer messages. It can decide how much pain you hide. It can decide how many times you ignore your own needs so nobody feels disappointed in you. And slowly, affection becomes something you try to purchase with your own energy. This is one of the most painful emotional trades a person can make. You give your peace to receive approval. You give your rest to receive praise. You give your boundaries to receive closeness. You give your health to receive the feeling that you still matter. But the more you trade yourself away, the less love is able to reach the real you, because the person being praised is not your full self. It is the exhausted version of you who learned to perform usefulness so well that people forgot to ask whether you were okay. Buddhist wisdom asks us to look at suffering honestly, not to shame ourselves, but to wake up. And one form of suffering that often hides under kindness is the suffering of compulsive giving. Giving itself is beautiful when it comes from compassion. But when giving comes from fear, it becomes a quiet form of self-abandonment. There is a difference between generosity and self-erasure. Generosity says, "I have something to offer, and I give it freely." Self-erasure says, "I must keep giving, even when I am empty, because I am afraid of what will happen if I stop." One brings warmth, the other brings resentment. One opens the heart, the other drains the soul. And many people confuse the two because they were praised for abandoning themselves early in life. Maybe you were called mature when you stopped needing comfort. Maybe you were called strong when you stopped asking for help. Maybe you were called kind when you swallowed your hurt to keep peace. Maybe you were called responsible when you carried what no child, partner, friend, or parent should have had to carry alone. So now, exhaustion feels familiar. It may even feel noble. But not every heavy thing is holy. Sometimes what you call devotion is actually fear wearing a gentle face. Sometimes what you call loyalty is actually the terror of being rejected. Sometimes what you call patience is actually silence built from old wounds. And this is where awareness becomes the beginning of freedom. The Buddha taught that suffering continues when we cling to what creates it. And many people cling to exhaustion because exhaustion has become part of their identity. They do not know who they are when they are not overextending. They do not know how to feel valuable without being tired. They do not know how to sit in peace without the mind accusing them of being selfish. So the first step is not to stop giving suddenly. The first step is to notice the fear underneath your giving. Ask yourself gently, am I doing this from love, or am I doing this because I am afraid? That question is not small. It can reveal years of hidden pain, because sometimes you will discover that you did not say yes because you wanted to. You said yes because you feared tension, you feared guilt, you feared silence, you feared being misunderstood. You feared someone's disappointment would mean you were no longer good. And when a person is controlled by that fear, they can become deeply tired while still appearing kind. This is why some people cannot relax even after doing everything right. They helped everyone. They answered everyone. They gave what was asked. They avoided conflict. They stayed pleasant. They stayed available. But at the end of the day, they do not feel loved. They feel used, invisible, and emotionally hungry, because affection earned through exhaustion never fully satisfies the heart. It only creates temporary relief. For a moment, people praise you. For a moment, they are pleased with you. For a moment, you feel safe because nobody is upset. But soon the anxiety returns, and you feel you must give again, prove again, stretch again, smile again, sacrifice again. This becomes a cycle. You feel unworthy, so you overgive. You overgive, so people expect more. People expect more, so you feel trapped. You feel trapped, so resentment grows. Resentment grows, so guilt appears. Guilt appears, so you give even more to prove you are still good. And the cycle continues until something inside you breaks. But Buddhist practice invites you to interrupt the cycle with awareness, not with anger, not with blame, awareness. A quiet noticing that says, this pattern is causing suffering. And once suffering is seen clearly, the path toward release begins. You cannot heal what you keep calling normal. That is why you must stop romanticizing exhaustion. Being constantly tired is not proof that you are loving deeply. Being always available is not proof that you are spiritually advanced. Ignoring your needs is not proof that you are compassionate. A candle that burns itself completely gives light for a while, yes. But when it is gone, darkness remains. And the purpose of your life is not to disappear just so others can feel briefly comfortable. In Buddhism, compassion includes wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion can become blind sacrifice. It can become giving without discernment. It can become saying yes when the kindest answer is no. It can become rescuing people from lessons they need to learn themselves. And this matters because some people do not simply ask for help. They become dependent on your exhaustion. They become used to your overgiving. They may not intend to harm you, but if you have always abandoned yourself for them, they may begin to see your self-abandonment as normal. Then, when you finally choose rest, they may react with confusion or anger. They may say, "You have changed." And maybe you have. Maybe you are no longer willing to be loved only when you are emptying yourself. Maybe you are no longer willing to turn your body into a bridge everyone crosses while nobody asks if the bridge is cracking. Maybe you are no longer willing to confuse being drained with being devoted. This kind of change can feel frightening because when you stop earning affection through exhaustion, some relationships will be tested. Not because you are cruel, but because your new boundaries reveal what was hidden. Some people will respect your limits. Some people will be surprised but adjust. Some people will only like the version of you that never says no. That realization may hurt, but it is also clarifying. Because love that depends on your exhaustion is not safe refuge. It is a contract you never consciously agreed to. And Buddhist self-worth asks you to step out of contracts built from fear. Not by becoming hard-hearted, but by becoming honest. Honesty may sound like, I cannot do that today. Honesty may sound like, I need rest. Honesty may sound like, I care about you, but I cannot carry this for you. Honesty may sound like, I am not available for this right now. These sentences may feel simple, but to someone who has earned affection through exhaustion, they can feel terrifying. The body may shake, the mind may panic, guilt may rise immediately. You may feel the old urge to explain, apologize, soften, over-justify, or offer something else to make up for having a boundary. That is normal when you are learning a new way to exist. Do not mistake discomfort for wrongdoing. Sometimes discomfort simply means you are leaving an old prison. The mind may say you are being selfish, but you must ask, is it selfish to stop abandoning myself? The mind may say they will be upset, but you must ask, can I survive someone's disappointment without betraying myself? The mind may say, you are not doing enough, but you must ask, who taught me that enough always means exhaustion? These questions are powerful because they expose the beliefs that have been quietly running your life. Many people do not overgive because they are overflowing with love. They overgive because they do not trust that love can survive their limits. That is the wound. And healing begins when you allow love to be tested by truth. If a connection can only survive when you are exhausted, then it is not resting on love. It is resting on performance, and performance can never give the heart real peace. Real affection does not require you to be constantly depleted. Real affection does not demand that you make yourself smaller, quieter, more available, and less needy every day. Real affection does not punish you for having a body, a heart, a limit, a season, a sadness, or a need. Real affection says, you are still welcome here when you cannot give. But to receive that kind of affection, you must stop offering exhaustion as the price of admission. This means learning to give from choice instead of fear. Choice feels different in the body. When you give from choice, there may be effort, but there is also peace. You do not feel secretly trapped. You do not feel bitter afterward. You do not feel like you must be praised to make the sacrifice worth it. You give because your heart agrees. Fear-giving feels different. It carries tension. It carries urgency. It carries resentment. It carries the feeling that something bad will happen if you refuse. It may look generous, but inside, it feels like survival. Start noticing the difference. Before agreeing to something, pause, breathe, let the request settle. Do not rush to answer just because your old self is terrified of disappointing people. A simple pause can save you from repeating a lifelong pattern. You can say, let me think about it. You can say, I need to check my energy. You can say, I will let you know. Those words create space between fear and action. And in that space, freedom begins. Buddhist practice is full of pauses. The pause before reacting. The pause before clinging. The pause before believing every thought. The pause before repeating old suffering. That pause is where awareness enters. You do not have to obey every urge to prove yourself. You do not have to respond instantly to every demand. You do not have to rescue every person from discomfort. You do not have to turn every relationship into a test of your endurance. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is stop making yourself available for patterns that keep everyone unconscious. When you stop overfunctioning, other people may have to grow. They may have to take responsibility. They may have to face their own emotions. They may have to solve what they kept handing to you. This may feel uncomfortable, but it is not cruel. You are not harming people by allowing them to carry what belongs to them. In fact, sometimes overgiving silently teaches others that they do not need to mature. It keeps them dependent. It keeps you exhausted. It keeps the relationship imbalanced. True compassion supports growth. It does not create permanent helplessness. This is why Buddhist love is not blind attachment. It is loving kindness with wisdom. It wants freedom for both people, not dependence for one and exhaustion for the other. To stop earning affection through exhaustion, you must also learn to tolerate the emptiness that appears when you are no longer constantly performing. At first, rest may not feel peaceful. It may feel strange. You may sit down and immediately feel guilty. You may have free time and feel useless. You may say no and feel nervous for hours. This does not mean rest is wrong. It means your nervous system is detoxing from constant proving. For years, perhaps your body associated busyness with safety. If you were busy, nobody could accuse you of being lazy. If you were helping, nobody could call you selfish. If you were exhausted, nobody could deny your effort. So when you rest, the old fear rises. Let it rise. Do not obey it immediately. Sit with it the way the Buddha taught people to sit with discomfort, with observation, patience, and compassion. Notice the guilt without becoming the guilt. Notice the fear without letting it drive. Notice the urge to prove yourself without turning it into action. You might whisper inwardly, "This is the old fear, it is not the truth." That simple sentence can become a doorway. Because much of healing is learning to separate old conditioning from present reality. The old fear says, "If I rest, I will be rejected." Reality may say, "I am allowed to be tired." The old fear says, "If I say no, I am bad." Reality may say, "A limit is not cruelty." The old fear says, "If I stop giving, I will have no value." Reality may say, "My worth is not measured by my exhaustion." Repeat that truth until your body begins to believe it. Your worth is not measured by your exhaustion. Your worth is not measured by how much pain you can carry silently. Your worth is not measured by how many people depend on you. Your worth is not measured by how long you can ignore yourself. For some people, this truth will feel emotional because they have waited years for permission to rest. They have been strong for so long that softness feels almost forbidden. They have spent their life being useful, good, needed, reliable, and emotionally available, but rarely held. If that is you, understand this gently. You are not lazy because you are tired. You are not unloving because you need space. You are not failing because you cannot keep giving at the same level forever. You are human. And being human means your energy is not endless. Even the earth has seasons. The field that grows food must also lie quiet. The tree that bears fruit must also stand bare. The ocean moves in tides. The moon changes shape. Nothing in nature gives constantly without rhythm. Only wounded people believe they must be endlessly available to deserve love. But you are allowed to have seasons. A season of giving, a season of resting, a season of healing, a season of being supported, a season of not knowing what comes next. You do not become less worthy in any of these seasons. This is where Buddhist self-worth becomes deeply freeing. It does not ask you to become more impressive. It asks you to see through the illusion that your lovability depends on constant output. It invites you to return to being, not just doing, being present, being honest, being gentle, being aware, being alive. There is so much dignity in simply being alive, though the world often forgets this. The world asks, "What did you accomplish?" Buddhism asks, Are you awake to this moment? The world asks, how much did you give? Wisdom asks, was your giving rooted in love or fear? The world asks, are you useful? Compassion asks, are you suffering? That last question matters, because if your giving is causing quiet suffering, it needs attention, not judgment, attention. Bring attention to the moments when you betray yourself for approval. Bring attention to the relationships where you feel you must stay exhausted to be accepted. Bring attention to the fear that rises when you choose rest. Bring attention to the old belief that affection must be earned through sacrifice. Awareness is gentle, but it is also powerful. It shows you where you have been abandoning yourself. And once you see it, you can begin choosing differently in small ways. Maybe today you do not answer immediately. Maybe today you let someone be disappointed. Maybe today you rest before you collapse. Maybe today you give only what you can give without resentment. Maybe today you stop explaining your tiredness like a crime. These small choices matter because they teach your nervous system a new truth. Love does not have to be purchased with depletion. At first, the change may feel slow. You may still overgive sometimes. You may still apologize too much. You may still feel guilty for having limits. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are practicing. The path is not perfection. The path is returning to awareness, returning to compassion, returning to the body, returning to the truth that you are allowed to exist without turning yourself into an offering for everyone else. And as you practice, something beautiful begins to happen. Your giving becomes cleaner, more honest, more peaceful. You stop giving with hidden resentment. You stop helping while secretly hoping someone will finally notice your pain. You stop using exhaustion as proof that you deserve love. Instead, you begin giving from fullness. And when you cannot give, you let that be true. This is maturity. This is wisdom. This is love with a spine. Because the goal is not to become cold. The goal is to become free. Free enough to love without fear. Free enough to help without self-erasure. Free enough to rest without guilt. Free enough to be loved when you are not useful, impressive, or endlessly available. And maybe that is the quiet miracle waiting inside this lesson. The moment you stop earning affection through exhaustion, you create space for a different kind of love to find you. A love that does not need you drained. A love that does not mistake your boundaries for betrayal. A love that does not only recognize you when you are carrying something heavy, but even before that love arrives from others, you can begin offering it to yourself. You can stop demanding endless proof from your own heart. You can stop treating your body like it must suffer before it deserves kindness. You can stop looking at rest as something you earn only after breaking down. You can place a hand over your chest and say, I am allowed to be cared for even when I am tired. That may sound simple, but for a person who has spent years performing strength, it can feel like a revolution. Because the deepest healing is not only learning that others can love you when you have nothing to give. It is learning that you can stop abandoning yourself when you have nothing to give. You can stay with yourself. You can be gentle with yourself. You can stop turning your exhaustion into a love offering. And as this truth settles in, the heart begins to breathe differently. It no longer has to run endlessly after affection. It no longer has to prove its right to be held. It no longer has to confuse collapse with devotion. You are allowed to love people without losing yourself. You are allowed to give without disappearing. You are allowed to rest before life forces you to. You are allowed to be loved in your quiet, tired, empty seasons. Because affection that requires your exhaustion is not the love your soul came here to find. Real love does not ask you to break yourself to be worthy of staying. And after spending so many years trying not to disappoint others, trying not to ask for too much, trying not to take up space, another painful fear often grows quietly inside the heart. It is the fear that your needs themselves are too heavy for other people to carry. The fear that your sadness is inconvenient. the fear that your struggles make you difficult to love. This fear does not usually scream. It whispers. It hides behind silence, behind forced independence, behind "I'm fine," behind smiling while suffering. And tonight, we are going to sit gently beside one of the deepest hidden wounds many people carry without ever speaking out loud, the quiet wound of feeling like a burden. There are people who apologize before they even ask for help. Sorry to bother you. Sorry for being emotional. Sorry for venting. Sorry for needing something. These sentences often sound small, but they reveal something heartbreaking happening underneath. Somewhere along the way, the person learned that their pain was too much. Their needs were too inconvenient. Their emotions were too uncomfortable for others to hold gently, so they began shrinking themselves. Not loudly, quietly, very quietly. They learned to cry in private. They learned to handle things alone. They learned to suffer silently so nobody would have to carry them. They became experts at appearing okay even when something inside them was collapsing. And the dangerous part is that many people praise this behavior. People call them independent, strong, low maintenance, easy to love. But often what they are really seeing is someone who became afraid of burdening others with their humanity. This fear can shape an entire personality. A person who feels like a burden may stop reaching out when they are hurting. They may isolate themselves during difficult seasons. They may hide their emotions until the pain becomes unbearable. They may convince themselves that everyone has more important things to worry about than them. Even while drowning emotionally, they may still say, "I don't want to bother anyone." That sentence carries enormous loneliness inside it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering becomes heavier when it is carried alone in silence. Not because asking for support removes all pain, but because isolation convinces the mind that it must survive without tenderness. And human beings were never meant to heal entirely alone, yet many people live as though needing comfort is weakness. This belief often begins early. Some children grow up around adults who react impatiently to emotions. A child cries, and instead of being comforted, they are told to stop being dramatic. A child expresses fear, and they are mocked for sensitivity. A child asks for reassurance, and the adults around them become irritated, overwhelmed, distant, or emotionally unavailable. Slowly, the child learns something painful. My emotions create stress for others. My needs are inconvenient. It is safer to stay quiet. And once that lesson enters the nervous system, it can remain there for decades. The person grows older, but the fear stays. Even as adults, they may still panic at the thought of depending on someone. They may avoid asking for help until they are completely overwhelmed. They may feel guilty when someone supports them financially, emotionally, or practically. They may constantly try to make up for receiving care by overgiving in return. Because receiving without guilt feels unfamiliar. This is one reason some people become uncomfortable when others are kind to them. Their mind immediately starts calculating repayment. What do I owe them now? How can I return this favor quickly? How long before they get tired of me? They cannot simply receive, because deep inside they fear becoming too much. The Buddha spoke often about compassion. But compassion is difficult to accept when you secretly believe your suffering is an inconvenience. You may intellectually understand that all beings deserve kindness, but emotionally, you still exclude yourself from that truth. You believe compassion is for everyone except you, so you become the listener instead of the speaker, the caretaker instead of the cared for, the strong one instead of the comforted one. The person who checks on everyone else while secretly hoping somebody notices that you are tired too. This creates a very quiet kind of heartbreak because people who fear being burdens often become emotionally invisible, not because nobody cares, but because they hide their needs so well that others cannot see the depth of their suffering. And after years of this, the loneliness becomes profound. There are people surrounded by friends, family, relationships, and conversations who still feel deeply alone because nobody truly knows how much pain they carry internally. They have spent so long minimizing themselves that even their closest relationships only know the edited version of them, the manageable version, the easy version, the version that does not ask for much. But inside, the heart is exhausted from carrying everything silently. Buddhist self-worth teaches something radical to a wounded mind. Your needs do not make you unworthy of love. That sentence may sound simple, but for some people it feels almost impossible to believe. Because they have spent years equating need with shame, need for reassurance, need for rest, need for support, need for understanding, need for affection, need for help, need for someone to simply stay beside them during difficult moments. The modern world often glorifies independence so aggressively that people begin feeling ashamed for being human. Everyone wants to appear self-sufficient, strong, unaffected, emotionally stable all the time. But Buddhism reminds us that vulnerability is not failure. Human beings are interconnected. We all need care at different points in life. Even the strongest person eventually becomes tired. Even the wisest person experiences grief. Even the calmest person sometimes needs support. There is no shame in this. But a person who feels like a burden struggles to believe that their pain deserves space. They may listen compassionately to others for hours, but the moment they speak about themselves, they begin apologizing. They rush through their feelings quickly. They minimize their experiences. They laugh nervously after expressing sadness. They change the subject. They say, "It's not a big deal," even when it is a very big deal. This self-minimization becomes automatic because the nervous system learned long ago that emotional visibility felt dangerous. Some people learned that when they struggled, they were ignored. Some learned that when they struggled, they were criticized. Some learned that when they struggled, others became overwhelmed. Some learned that love disappeared during difficult moments, so now they try to protect relationships by hiding themselves. But hiding pain does not create closeness. It creates distance disguised as peace. Real intimacy requires truth, and truth includes the difficult parts of being alive. It includes sadness, fear, confusion, need, loneliness, exhaustion, the desire to be held emotionally without feeling guilty for it. But when someone feels like a burden, even receiving comfort can feel uncomfortable. They may tense up when someone helps them. They may immediately try to end the conversation. They may downplay their suffering so the other person does not worry too much. Notice how many people say things like, "I'm sorry, I know everyone has their own problems." That sentence reveals how deeply they fear occupying emotional space. It is as though they believe pain must compete for permission to exist. And often, these people become extremely emotionally independent, not because independence always feels good, but because dependence feels terrifying. They trust themselves more than they trust being held gently by others, so they carry impossible amounts of pain alone, not because they want to, because they are afraid of rejection, afraid of judgment, afraid of overwhelming people, afraid of hearing silence after finally speaking honestly. This fear can become especially intense after experiencing abandonment or emotional neglect. If someone opened up in the past and was ignored, mocked, dismissed, or left behind, the mind may decide, never again. The person may still crave closeness deeply, but they stop believing it is safe to need anyone. This creates a painful contradiction. They long for connection, but hide their pain. They want comfort, but reject support. They want to be seen, but fear visibility. They want love, but feel ashamed of the very needs that make love possible. And slowly, they begin carrying life as though their suffering should remain invisible forever. But suffering hidden in darkness does not disappear. It grows heavier. The Buddha taught that compassion begins with recognizing suffering honestly, not denying it, not hiding it, not pretending to be above it. recognizing it gently and truthfully. You cannot heal while constantly pretending you are okay. And yet many people feel guilty even reading that sentence because they have built their identity around not needing much from others. Perhaps you know this feeling. Perhaps you have sat alone during painful nights, convincing yourself not to text anyone because you did not want to be annoying. Perhaps you have cried quietly so nobody would hear. Perhaps you have gone through difficult moments while still comforting everybody else. Perhaps you have carried depression, grief, anxiety, heartbreak, or exhaustion silently because you believed speaking honestly would make you too heavy to love. If so, understand this gently. Your pain is not proof that you are a burden. Pain is part of being alive. Every human being suffers. Every human being eventually needs tenderness. The idea that you must always remain emotionally easy to deserve care is not wisdom, it is fear. And fear has convinced countless people to abandon themselves emotionally before anyone else even had the chance to reject them. This self-abandonment often looks invisible from the outside. You continue functioning, you continue helping, you continue smiling, but internally you stop bringing your full self into relationships. You bring only the parts that feel acceptable, the calm parts, the useful parts, the emotionally manageable parts. And over time, this creates deep emotional starvation, because the heart cannot feel truly loved while hiding half its reality. Real love requires the courage to be seen honestly, not perfectly, honestly. This does not mean telling everyone every detail of your pain. Buddhism values wisdom and discernment too. Not everyone earns full access to your vulnerability, but there is a difference between healthy discernment and total emotional isolation. A person who feels like a burden often isolates automatically. They decide for others that their pain is unwelcome before giving anyone the opportunity to respond with compassion. This is important to notice. Sometimes the rejection you fear has not even happened yet. The mind is protecting you from old memories, not current reality. The nervous system remembers emotional wounds deeply. If you were treated like a burden before, your body may now expect that treatment everywhere. Even safe people may feel unsafe at first because your mind has been trained to prepare for emotional abandonment. Healing takes patience here. You cannot force yourself to trust overnight, but you can begin practicing small acts of emotional honesty. You can allow yourself to say, "I'm struggling." You can allow yourself to accept help without immediately apologizing. You can allow yourself to speak without minimizing everything. You can allow yourself to stop performing okayness every second of the day. These small moments matter because they slowly teach the nervous system that your needs do not automatically destroy connection. And if someone reacts poorly to your humanity, that response reveals something about their capacity, not your worth. This is another important Buddhist lesson. Other people's discomfort with your pain does not determine whether your pain deserves compassion. Some people simply lack emotional maturity. Some people become uncomfortable with vulnerability because they have not faced their own wounds. Some people only know how to relate through positivity, distraction, or avoidance. That is about them, not your lovability. A flower does not become ugly because somebody failed to water it properly, and your emotional needs do not become shameful because someone once failed to hold them gently. The problem is that wounded people internalize rejection very personally. They think, if my emotions overwhelmed someone, then my emotions must be wrong. But emotions are not wrong. They are signals. They are part of the human experience. Sadness is not weakness. Need is not failure. Grief is not inconvenience. Loneliness is not proof of defectiveness. And needing support does not make you difficult to love. In fact, one of the deepest forms of human connection is mutual vulnerability. Healthy relationships are not built by one person always carrying and the other person always receiving. Real connection allows both people to be human, both people to need, both people to rest, both people to speak honestly, But a person who fears being a burden often struggles with reciprocity. They give naturally, but receiving feels emotionally dangerous. So the relationship becomes unbalanced. They become emotionally over-responsible while secretly starving for care. This imbalance eventually creates exhaustion, not because the person is weak, because the soul cannot survive forever without safe tenderness. Buddhism teaches balance for a reason. Even compassion must breathe. Even kindness must include the self. Otherwise, love turns into martyrdom, and martyrdom slowly empties the heart. This is why self-compassion matters so deeply. Self-compassion says, "My pain matters too." Self-compassion says, "I do not need to justify my exhaustion." Self-compassion says, "I am allowed to exist with needs." Self-compassion says, "Being human is not something I need to apologize for." These ideas may feel unfamiliar if you spent years surviving by being emotionally undemanding. You may even feel resistance while hearing them. Part of you may still believe that making yourself smaller protects relationships. But shrinking yourself never creates true closeness. It only creates relationships with your mask. And eventually, wearing that mask becomes unbearable. You begin craving spaces where you can exhale honestly, spaces where you do not have to monitor your emotions constantly, spaces where you can say, "I am not okay," without fearing rejection immediately afterward. That craving is not weakness. It is your nervous system longing for safety, and safety changes people profoundly. When someone finally experiences a relationship where they are not treated like a burden for having emotions, something inside them softens, their body relaxes, their voice changes, their breathing slows, they stop apologizing every few minutes, they stop panicking after opening up, they begin realizing how heavy self-silencing had become. Sometimes people cry, not because someone said something extraordinary, but because someone stayed gentle after hearing the truth. That gentleness heals, not perfectly, not instantly, but deeply, because many wounded hearts are not searching for perfection. They are searching for permission to exist without shame. And perhaps this is one of the quietest spiritual truths Buddhism offers. Your suffering does not make you less worthy of compassion, not even when it lasts a long time, not even when it is messy, not even when you are tired of yourself. You do not become a burden because you are struggling. You become human, and humans were never meant to survive only by pretending they need nothing. This does not mean becoming emotionally dependent on everyone around you. Buddhism does not encourage clinging. There is wisdom in learning emotional grounding, mindfulness, and inner steadiness. But inner steadiness is different from emotional suppression. True inner peace does not come from denying your needs. It comes from meeting them without shame. That is the difference. A person who feels like a burden often believes they must deserve care before receiving it. They wait until they are completely overwhelmed before reaching out. They convince themselves others have it worse. They minimize their pain until the body begins carrying stress it was never meant to hold alone. But compassion is not a competition. You do not need to prove your suffering is severe enough before deserving kindness. You do not need to collapse publicly before your exhaustion becomes valid. You do not need permission to be human. This is why healing the wound of feeling like a burden is not only about learning to ask for help. It is about learning to stop treating your existence as a problem to manage carefully around others. You are not a problem. Your emotions are not stains. Your needs are not crimes. Your sadness is not selfishness. Your exhaustion is not inconvenience. And the people capable of real love will not make you feel guilty for being alive honestly. They may not always know the perfect thing to say. They may not always fix the pain, but they will not punish you for having a heart. That matters very deeply, because many people are carrying childhood wounds into adulthood without realizing it. They still expect rejection when they express vulnerability. They still fear becoming too much. They still prepare for emotional abandonment every time they need support. But not everyone will leave. Not everyone will resent your humanity. Not everyone will treat your pain like an inconvenience. And even more importantly, you do not need to keep abandoning yourself before anyone else has the chance to respond differently. That self-abandonment must end gently. It ends when you stop apologizing for existing emotionally. It ends when you allow yourself to need rest. It ends when you let trustworthy people care about you. It ends when you stop measuring your worth by how little space you occupy. It ends when you understand that taking up emotional space does not make you selfish. The sky does not apologize for being wide. The ocean does not apologize for being deep. And your heart does not need to apologize for carrying human feelings. Perhaps the deepest tragedy is not that some people were treated like burdens. The deepest tragedy is that they eventually started believing it themselves. But beliefs can change. Slowly, patiently, compassionately. The Buddha never taught people to hate their suffering. He taught them to look at it clearly, understand its roots, and stop building identity around it. Feeling like a burden is not your identity. It is a wound, and wounds deserve care, not shame. So tonight, if part of you still fears being too much, hear this gently. You are not difficult to love because you have needs. You are not exhausting because you feel emotions. You are not weak because you need support sometimes. You are not a burden because life became heavy. And you do not have to earn your right to be comforted by becoming silent enough for everyone else to stay comfortable around you. The heart deserves relationships where it can breathe honestly, relationships where vulnerability is not punished, relationships where support flows both ways, relationships where you are not loved only when you are easy, cheerful, useful, or emotionally convenient. Most of all, your own heart deserves to stop treating itself like a problem, because healing begins the moment you stop asking, "How small must I become so nobody leaves?" and start asking, "What would happen if I finally allowed myself to be human without shame?" That question can change a life. And perhaps for the first time in many years, it can also allow your tired heart to rest. And when a person spends too many years feeling like a burden, another dangerous belief quietly begins to grow inside them. They stop seeing their pain as temporary. They stop seeing exhaustion as a season. Slowly, they begin believing that their emptiness is who they are. This is one of the saddest things suffering can do to the human mind. It can turn a passing season into an identity. It can make a tired person believe they are permanently broken. It can make someone who is struggling temporarily believe they have lost all worth forever. And tonight, we are going to speak gently about why your empty season is not your true identity, because many people are drowning inside moments that were never meant to define their entire existence. There are seasons in life where the soul feels unusually quiet. The energy disappears, motivation fades, joy becomes distant, even simple things begin to feel heavy. You wake up tired, you speak less, you withdraw more, you stop recognizing yourself fully. And during those seasons, the mind becomes cruel. It whispers things like, "This is who you really are. You are lazy. You are failing. You have nothing left. You will never feel alive again." The problem is not only the suffering itself. The problem is that the mind starts turning temporary pain into permanent identity. A person who once laughed easily now believes they are joyless forever. A person who once loved deeply now believes they are emotionally empty forever. A person who once felt hopeful now believes hope itself has died inside them forever. But Buddhism teaches something profoundly important. All conditions are temporary. Thoughts change, feelings change, energy changes, seasons change, even suffering changes. The Buddha taught impermanence because human beings easily become trapped inside moments. When pain lasts long enough, the mind forgets movement exists. It begins seeing the present moment as the final truth about life itself. But your emptiness is not your essence. Your exhaustion is not your identity. Your grief is not your final form. There are winters in the human spirit just as there are winters in nature. During winter, trees appear lifeless. Their branches stand bare. Their color disappears. Their fruit is gone. But the tree is not dead. It is conserving energy quietly beneath the surface. Many people do not understand this about themselves. When they enter emotionally empty seasons, they panic immediately because modern culture worships constant productivity, happiness, energy, and momentum. If you are not thriving visibly, the world often makes you feel like you are failing. So when someone enters a season of emotional heaviness, they begin comparing themselves to who they used to be. I used to be more motivated. I used to be happier. I used to have dreams. I used to feel alive. And instead of treating the season with compassion, they begin attacking themselves for changing. But human beings are not machines. You are not supposed to remain emotionally identical through every season of life. Loss changes people. Burnout changes people. Heartbreak changes people. Illness changes people. Loneliness changes people. Disappointment changes people. The problem is not that you changed. The problem is that you started believing change erased your worth. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment creates suffering, and one painful attachment many people carry is attachment to a previous version of themselves. They keep mourning who they used to be instead of meeting who they are becoming with gentleness. This creates a second layer of suffering. Not only are they hurting, but they are ashamed for hurting. Not only are they tired, but they hate themselves for being tired. Not only are they struggling, but they panic that struggling means they are becoming unlovable. And this shame deepens the emptiness, because shame isolates. It convinces people to hide during difficult seasons. They stop answering messages. They stop showing up fully. They disappear emotionally because they no longer feel worthy of being seen while struggling. This is why empty seasons can become dangerous. Not because emptiness itself destroys people, but because people begin identifying with the emptiness completely. Instead of saying, I am going through a hard season, they begin saying, I am nothing. That difference matters deeply. A season is temporary. An identity feels permanent. The Buddha encouraged people to observe their inner world carefully because the mind constantly creates fixed stories about temporary experiences. A difficult emotion appears and the mind says, this will never end. A painful season arrives and the mind says, this is who you are now. But the mind is not always truthful. Sometimes the mind speaks from fear, exhaustion, and old wounds rather than wisdom. And when a person is emotionally depleted, they often lose perspective. They begin viewing themselves only through the lens of what they currently cannot do. They cannot focus like before, cannot smile like before, cannot dream like before, cannot give like before, cannot function like before. And because they live in a world obsessed with performance, they begin believing they themselves have lost value. This is why empty seasons often create identity crises. When the external things that once gave you confidence disappear, you are forced to face a terrifying question. Who am I when I am not productive, admired, energetic, useful, successful, or emotionally strong? That question can feel unbearable at first, because many people built their entire self-worth around movement, around doing, around achieving, around helping, around surviving. So when life suddenly slows them down, they feel worthless instead of wounded. But wounded and worthless are not the same thing. A person recovering from emotional exhaustion is not worthless. A grieving person is not worthless. A depressed person is not worthless. A confused person is not worthless. A tired soul is not worthless. And yet many people speak to themselves as though their difficult season erased their humanity completely. This harshness often comes from fear. Fear that they will never recover. Fear that people will leave if they remain low energy too long. Fear that rest will become permanent failure. Fear that emptiness means there is nothing meaningful left inside them. But emptiness is often not absence. Sometimes emptiness is transition. A field looks empty after harvest, but that emptiness prepares the soil for future growth. A caterpillar disappears into stillness before transformation. Even the moon disappears partially before becoming full again. Nature never panics during quiet seasons. Only humans treat rest, slowing down, or emotional emptiness as moral failure. Buddhist teaching asks us to stop fighting impermanence and begin understanding it. Everything changes, even identity changes. The version of you that exists today is not the final version of you forever. This matters because many people lose hope too quickly during difficult seasons. They assume temporary heaviness predicts the rest of their life. But emotions move like weather, not stone. Some storms stay longer than expected, yes. Some winters feel endless. Some nights stretch painfully. But no internal state remains frozen forever. Even now, while listening to this, parts of you are changing quietly beneath the surface. Healing rarely announces itself dramatically. Sometimes healing begins as tiny shifts. You sleep slightly better one night. You laugh unexpectedly at something small. You feel calm for 5 minutes instead of 2. You answer one message you had been avoiding. You feel sunlight on your skin and notice it for the first time in weeks. These moments may seem insignificant, but they are signs of movement, signs that the soul is not dead, signs that emptiness is not permanent identity. But a person trapped in hopelessness often dismisses small healing because they are waiting to feel completely transformed immediately. If total recovery does not happen fast enough, they assume nothing is improving. This impatience creates suffering too. Buddhism teaches patience because real transformation often happens slowly, quietly, invisibly. A wound does not disappear because you demand it to heal faster. Healing unfolds in layers. The heart softens gradually. The nervous system relearns safety gradually. The spirit regains trust gradually. And during this process, there may still be empty days. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. One of the most compassionate things you can do during an empty season is stop demanding immediate resurrection from yourself. Stop expecting your exhausted spirit to bloom overnight just because you are uncomfortable with stillness. Some seasons are meant for rebuilding quietly. Some seasons are meant for grieving fully. Some seasons are meant for resting deeply. Some seasons are meant for discovering who you are beneath constant motion. And perhaps this is what scares many people most. Empty seasons remove distractions. Without constant busyness, achievement, social performance, or emotional overfunctioning, you are left alone with yourself. That can feel uncomfortable. Because beneath exhaustion, many people discover sadness they never processed, loneliness they ignored, anger they buried, dreams they abandoned, parts of themselves they silenced to survive. An empty season often strips away illusion. And while painful, this can also become sacred, because sometimes the version of you that collapses was built entirely around survival, not peace. The strong version, the pleasing version, the endlessly productive version, the emotionally numb version, the constantly giving version. When those versions finally break down, it can feel terrifying. But breakdown is not always destruction. Sometimes it is the beginning of honesty. The Buddha never promised a life without suffering. He taught awareness within suffering. Awareness changes everything because it allows you to witness pain without becoming pain itself. You can say, "I feel empty right now," without concluding, "I am emptiness." You can say, "I feel lost," without concluding, "I am permanently broken." You can say, "I am struggling," without concluding, "I have no value." This separation is deeply important because suffering becomes dangerous when identity fuses with it completely. And many people living through empty seasons forget they are more than the pain they currently feel. There are still beautiful things inside them, still tenderness, still intelligence, still humanity, still possibility, still life waiting quietly beneath the exhaustion. But pain narrows vision. It makes the future look smaller. It convinces people that because they cannot feel hope strongly right now, hope no longer exists. This is why compassion matters during empty seasons. Harshness only deepens despair. A person already drowning internally does not need more self-punishment. They need gentleness. Imagine speaking to a winter tree with cruelty. "You are useless. You have no leaves. You are failing." It would sound absurd because we understand seasons in nature instinctively. We know trees are not defective for resting. We know barren seasons are part of life cycles. Yet humans rarely offer themselves the same wisdom. Instead, they compare their winter to somebody else's spring. They compare their exhaustion to someone else's energy, their confusion to someone else's clarity, their stillness to someone else's success. And comparison turns temporary pain into deep shame. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that comparison is another form of suffering. Every life unfolds differently. Every heart carries different wounds, lessons, timing, and karmic experiences. Your path is not behind because it looks different right now. And your current season does not define your entire future. Many people who later become deeply compassionate, wise, grounded, and emotionally awake first walked through long seasons of emptiness. Those seasons stripped away illusions. They taught humility. They softened judgment. They deepened empathy. They forced inner transformation. Painful seasons often shape the soul in invisible ways, but while inside them it can feel impossible to believe anything meaningful is happening, especially when the world only celebrates visible success. The world praises blooming. Few people praise surviving winter, but survival matters too. Quiet endurance matters too. Choosing to stay alive emotionally during empty seasons is not weakness. Sometimes it is profound courage. There are days where getting out of bed quietly becomes courage. Answering one message becomes courage. Eating becomes courage. Breathing through loneliness becomes courage. Continuing despite emotional numbness becomes courage. But because these victories are invisible, people dismiss them. They say, "I should be doing more." No. Sometimes healing requires less doing and more allowing. Allowing yourself to be unfinished. Allowing yourself to move slowly. Allowing yourself to not have answers immediately. Allowing yourself to exist without performing brightness every second. This is incredibly difficult for people who built their worth around functionality. Empty seasons threaten their identity because they can no longer operate at previous levels, so they begin treating themselves cruelly. But cruelty cannot heal exhaustion. Only compassion can. And compassion does not mean pretending pain feels good. It means refusing to abandon yourself during pain. This changes everything, because many people are willing to stay beside others during difficult seasons, but abandon themselves immediately when they personally begin struggling. They lose patience with themselves quickly, lose tenderness quickly, lose faith quickly. But healing requires staying gentle when progress feels slow, staying compassionate when energy disappears, staying connected to your humanity even while feeling emotionally numb. The Buddha taught mindfulness partly because mindfulness anchors you in the present moment instead of catastrophic stories about the future. An empty season feels unbearable partly because the mind keeps projecting forever. This feeling will never end. I will never recover. I will always feel this way. But those are predictions, not truth. And the exhausted mind is rarely a reliable fortune teller. There were likely moments in your past where you believed you would never survive certain pain. Yet here you are, still breathing, still listening, still searching for meaning. That matters. Your spirit may feel tired, but it is not gone. There is still something alive inside you seeking light, even if softly, even if weakly, even if quietly. And perhaps that quietness itself carries wisdom. The modern world constantly demands noise, productivity, speed, visibility, and endless self-improvement. But Buddhism often points toward stillness instead, toward presence, toward sitting beside reality without running from it immediately. An empty season may be teaching you how to stop measuring your worth through constant motion. It may be teaching you how to sit with yourself honestly. It may be teaching you that identity deeper than productivity exists. It may be teaching you that your soul deserves care even when it is not blooming beautifully for others to admire. This is difficult wisdom, but sacred wisdom. Because eventually, if you stop fighting yourself long enough, you begin noticing something surprising. Even during emptiness, life still moves gently around you. Morning still arrives, rain still falls, birds still sing, your breath still rises and falls. Tiny moments of beauty still appear quietly, and these small moments matter because they remind you that existence continues even while transformation is unfinished. You do not need to become radiant overnight to deserve tenderness now. You do not need to become fully healed before your life has meaning again. You do not need to escape every difficult emotion before you are worthy of love. An empty season is not evidence that you failed as a human being. It is a season, and seasons move. That movement may feel painfully slow sometimes, but slowness is not permanence. One day, perhaps quietly, you will notice something changing, the heaviness lifting slightly, the numbness softening, the laughter returning unexpectedly, the hope appearing in small flashes, the desire to reconnect with life returning gently. And when that day comes, you may realize something important. You were never emptiness itself. You were a human being passing through emptiness. There is a difference, a very important difference, because your true identity was never your sadness, your burnout, your confusion, your loneliness, your grief, your depression, your fear, or your exhaustion. Those experiences affected you deeply, yes, but they are weather passing through the sky of your awareness, not the entire sky itself. Buddhism teaches that beneath changing conditions, there is awareness observing them all. The thoughts change, the emotions change, the seasons change, but awareness remains. And if awareness remains, then transformation remains possible too. So do not rush to define yourself by your lowest season. Do not look at temporary emptiness and call it your final truth. Do not confuse stillness with failure. Do not confuse exhaustion with worthlessness. Do not confuse emotional winter with permanent death of the soul. The tree resting in winter is not failing. The ocean during low tide is not empty forever. The moon disappearing partially has not lost its existence, and you too are more than the season you are currently surviving. Even now, beneath the tiredness, beneath the fear, beneath the heaviness, something inside you is still quietly alive, still worthy, still becoming, still waiting patiently for spring. And once a person begins understanding that their empty season is not their true identity, another quiet challenge appears almost immediately. Even when love, kindness, or support finally arrives, many wounded hearts still struggle to accept it fully. Their hands know how to give. Their minds know how to survive. But their nervous system does not know how to receive without guilt. So tonight, we are going to speak softly about one of the most difficult spiritual practices for people who spent their lives earning love through usefulness. The practice of receiving without apologizing. There are people who say thank you with tension in their voice, not because they are ungrateful, because they feel ashamed for needing anything at all. Someone offers help, and immediately the apology appears. Sorry to ask. Sorry for the trouble. You really didn't have to. I'll pay you back. I owe you. Even kindness becomes emotionally heavy because the person receiving it secretly believes their needs create inconvenience. This wound runs deep. Some people can spend years giving love freely while feeling deeply uncomfortable whenever love flows back toward them. They can comfort others naturally, but when someone comforts them, they become restless. They can support everyone else emotionally, but the moment someone tries to support them, they start minimizing their pain or changing the subject. This is because receiving requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels dangerous to a heart that learned early that dependence could lead to shame, disappointment, rejection, or emotional abandonment. Buddhist wisdom teaches balance in all things. Breathing itself teaches balance. You inhale, you exhale. Life flows through receiving and giving together. But many wounded people only feel safe in the giving position. Giving allows control. Giving allows usefulness. Giving feels safer than admitting need. Receiving, however, exposes something tender. It reveals that you are human too, that you also become tired, that you also need support, that you cannot carry life entirely alone forever. And for some people, that realization triggers deep fear, because somewhere in their past, receiving may have come with conditions. Perhaps kindness was later used against them. Perhaps help came with guilt attached. Perhaps affection disappeared once they needed too much. Perhaps vulnerability was mocked. Perhaps dependence created disappointment. So now the nervous system stays guarded, even during love, even during care, even during genuine compassion. The body remains tense because it has learned to associate receiving with emotional risk. This is why some people struggle to accept compliments. Someone says something kind, and immediately they deflect it. It's nothing. I'm not really that good. You're just being nice. Instead of allowing kindness to land softly, they push it away almost automatically, not because they dislike kindness, because they do not know what to do with it. Their inner world has become so organized around earning that freely receiving feels almost suspicious. And this creates deep loneliness, because love cannot fully enter a heart that constantly rejects nourishment out of fear. The Buddha taught that attachment and aversion both create suffering. Most people understand attachment easily, but aversion can hide quietly inside people who reject support, reject tenderness, reject help, reject rest, and reject emotional care because they are afraid of depending on anything outside themselves. They become emotionally self-protective, but protection can slowly turn into isolation. Some people pride themselves on never needing anyone. They survive everything alone. They carry pain privately. They handle problems silently. They never ask for much. From the outside, this can look like strength, but often it is exhaustion disguised as independence. True strength is not refusing all support. True strength is allowing yourself to remain human without shame. A person who cannot receive compassion eventually becomes emotionally starved, no matter how much they give. The heart was not designed only to pour outward endlessly. Human beings need warmth flowing inward too. Need is not weakness. Dependency is not always failure. Receiving is not selfishness. And yet many people still panic internally whenever someone cares for them deeply. You can see it in small moments. Someone offers to help carry something, and they refuse automatically even when struggling physically. Someone offers emotional support, and they immediately say, "I'll be okay." Someone gives them a gift, and instead of enjoying it, they feel guilty. Someone tries to comfort them, and they begin apologizing for crying. These reactions are not random habits. They are survival responses created by old emotional conditioning. Perhaps nobody taught them that they deserved gentleness without repayment. Perhaps they learned that receiving made them vulnerable to disappointment. Perhaps they were only valued for what they gave, never for simply existing. So now, every act of care feels emotionally complicated. The mind starts calculating immediately. How can I return this? How long before they resent me? What do they expect from me now? Am I becoming too dependent? This constant internal calculation prevents the nervous system from resting inside love. And rest is important, because love is not only about being seen, it is also about being safely held. Buddhist compassion is not transactional. It does not say, you deserve kindness only after proving yourself enough. Compassion recognizes suffering and responds gently to it. This is why learning to receive without apologizing becomes spiritual work. It challenges the deep belief that your needs are burdensome. At first, this practice feels uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. If you spent years surviving through hyper-independence, allowing yourself to receive can feel like losing control. The body may tense, guilt may rise, shame may appear. You may feel the urge to immediately repay the kindness somehow. But healing asks you to pause before reacting automatically. Pause before apologizing. Pause before rejecting support. Pause before minimizing your pain. Pause before convincing yourself that you must immediately earn back the care you just received. That pause creates awareness, and awareness changes everything. You begin noticing how quickly your mind turns tenderness into debt. You begin noticing how difficult it is for you to simply let someone be kind. You begin noticing how uncomfortable softness feels after years of emotional survival mode. This noticing matters because it reveals how deeply the wound lives inside the body. Many people think they have self-worth because they function well externally, but self-worth becomes truly visible in how comfortably you receive care when you are weak, tired, uncertain, emotional, or struggling. Can you receive help without shame? Can you receive love without immediately trying to earn it back? Can you receive support without apologizing for existing? These questions reveal profound truths about the relationship you have with yourself. Some people can work endlessly for others, but cannot sit still while someone else cares for them for 5 minutes. That imbalance reveals a nervous system trained for survival, not peace. And Buddhist practice is deeply connected to peace. Not the performance of peace, actual inner softness, actual trust, actual willingness to exist without constantly defending your worthiness. This is difficult because many wounded hearts secretly believe they become dangerous when needy. They fear becoming too much, so they try to manage their humanity carefully. They ration their emotions. They avoid asking for reassurance. They avoid depending on anyone emotionally. But eventually, this self-containment becomes lonely. The heart becomes exhausted from holding itself together all the time. And ironically, the more a person refuses to receive support, the more emotionally depleted they often become. Not because they are weak, because human beings are relational creatures. Even monks in Buddhist communities practice interdependence. They meditate together, eat together, support one another. Wisdom does not teach emotional isolation. It teaches freedom from unhealthy attachment, not freedom from human connection itself. This distinction matters. Some people confuse emotional numbness with enlightenment. They think needing nobody makes them spiritually strong. But shutting down the need for tenderness often creates hidden suffering. The goal is not emotional starvation. The goal is balanced compassion, balanced love, balanced presence, giving and receiving flowing naturally together. Think about nature for a moment. The earth receives rain, trees receive sunlight, flowers receive water, the lungs receive air. Nothing alive survives by giving only. Receiving is part of life itself. Yet many people treat receiving as moral weakness. Why? Because somewhere along the way they connected self-worth to self-sufficiency. If I need help, I failed. If I lean on someone, I am weak. If I cannot handle everything alone, I am disappointing. But these beliefs create enormous emotional pressure. They force people into impossible levels of independence that slowly disconnect them from intimacy. Because intimacy requires mutuality. Mutuality means both people matter, both people give, both people receive, both people carry sometimes, both people rest sometimes. A relationship where only one person gives endlessly eventually becomes emotionally imbalanced. And often, the giver secretly hopes someone will eventually notice their exhaustion without them having to ask. But unspoken pain cannot always be seen clearly. This is why vulnerability matters, not dramatic oversharing, honest humanity. Being able to say, I need support right now. Being able to say, I'm tired. Being able to say, I cannot carry this alone today. These sentences sound simple, but for someone who fears being a burden, they can feel terrifying, because speaking need aloud risks rejection. But hiding need creates silent suffering, and silent suffering often becomes identity over time. The Buddha taught that clinging creates pain. One form of clinging is clinging to the image of being endlessly strong. Some people are so attached to appearing capable that they deny themselves basic emotional nourishment. They become emotionally dehydrated while trying to look invulnerable. But invulnerability is not peace. Peace allows tenderness. Peace allows honesty. Peace allows the nervous system to unclench. And sometimes the nervous system only begins unclenching when it finally experiences safe receiving. Safe receiving changes people slowly. The first time someone helps you without shaming you. The first time someone stays patient while you cry. The first time someone listens without rushing to fix or judge. The first time someone says, you do not have to handle this alone. These moments can feel strangely emotional because they challenge old beliefs. The body expects rejection, but kindness remains. The mind expects punishment, but gentleness remains. And slowly, the nervous system begins learning a new truth. Maybe my needs do not automatically destroy love. This relearning takes time. A person conditioned by emotional neglect does not suddenly relax overnight. They may still apologize frequently, still minimize themselves, still struggle with guilt after receiving help. That is okay. Healing is not perfection. Healing is practice. The practice of allowing yourself to be supported, allowing kindness to land, allowing rest without immediate repayment, allowing someone to care for you without turning the moment into a debt contract. This last part is especially important. Many wounded people turn every act of kindness into emotional debt. Someone helps them once, and immediately they feel pressure to give back excessively. They feel uncomfortable until balance is restored. But real love is not bookkeeping. Healthy relationships naturally flow back and forth over time. Sometimes one person carries more, sometimes the other does. Seasons change, energy changes, needs change, love breathes. It is not calculated moment by moment. This is why receiving without apologizing is deeply connected to trust. Trust that you do not need to constantly purchase your place in people's hearts. Trust that support does not automatically create burden. Trust that your humanity is not an inconvenience. Trust that being cared for does not make you weak. Many people have never fully trusted these truths before, so they continue exhausting themselves trying to stay ahead of need, trying to stay impressive enough, trying to stay emotionally manageable enough, trying to stay self-sufficient enough. But eventually life humbles every human being. Everyone reaches seasons where they cannot carry everything alone. Illness humbles people. Grief humbles people. Burnout humbles people. Loss humbles people. Depression humbles people. Aging humbles people. And during these seasons, receiving becomes unavoidable. This is where Buddhist wisdom becomes compassionate. It does not shame human limitation. It does not demand perfection. It recognizes vulnerability as part of existence itself. You were never supposed to become a machine incapable of needing warmth. You were never supposed to earn every drop of tenderness through suffering. You were never supposed to apologize for being alive honestly. And yet so many people still whisper sorry every time they take up emotional space. Sorry for crying, sorry for resting, sorry for needing reassurance, sorry for asking for help, sorry for existing imperfectly. This constant apologizing slowly trains the mind to believe your humanity itself is problematic. But your humanity is not a mistake. Your exhaustion is not a moral failure. Your need for comfort is not weakness. And perhaps the deepest healing begins the moment you stop saying sorry for things that deserve compassion instead. Instead of sorry for crying, perhaps your heart learns to say, thank you for listening. Instead of sorry for needing help, perhaps it learns to say, I appreciate your support. Instead of sorry for struggling, perhaps it learns to say, I'm going through something difficult right now. These small language shifts matter because words shape identity. Constant apology reinforces shame. Gentle honesty reinforces self-worth. The Buddha often emphasized mindful speech because words carry energy into the mind repeatedly. If you constantly speak about yourself as inconvenience, burden, problem, or failure, your nervous system absorbs that identity deeper and deeper. But if you begin speaking to yourself with compassion, something changes gradually. Not instantly, gradually. You begin softening around your own needs. You begin noticing that worthy people also struggle, that lovable people also become tired, that good people also need support, that being cared for is not proof you failed. And slowly, the fear around receiving begins loosening. This matters because when people cannot receive love properly, they often sabotage closeness unconsciously. They reject help repeatedly. They emotionally withdraw when struggling. They insist they are fine while drowning internally. Over time, this creates distance even with people who genuinely want to care, not because they are bad people, because they are afraid. Afraid that if someone truly sees how much they need, they will eventually leave. But real intimacy cannot grow where receiving is constantly blocked. Love needs openings, small openings, openings where the heart says, I trust you enough to let you see my humanity. That trust is sacred, and Buddhism teaches that sacredness often exists in simple moments of awareness and presence. A quiet conversation, a hand held gently, a meal shared, tears witnessed without judgment, silence shared without fear. These moments nourish the soul deeply because they remind us we are not meant to survive entirely alone. Isolation hardens people. Safe receiving softens them again. A person who finally learns to receive without shame begins changing slowly. They stop proving constantly. They stop panicking every time they need rest. They stop apologizing for every emotion. They stop treating care as something they must earn through suffering first. Instead, they begin understanding something beautiful. Compassion was always meant to include them too, not just others, them too. This realization can feel almost overwhelming at first because many people spent years giving compassion outward while secretly starving themselves emotionally. They became experts at kindness for everyone except themselves. But self-compassion changes the entire inner world. Self-compassion allows receiving. Self-compassion allows softness. Self-compassion allows human limitation without immediate self-hatred. And perhaps this is why Buddhist self-worth feels so different from worldly self-worth. The world says, prove your value constantly. Compassion says, your humanity already matters. The world says, earn your place. Compassion says, you belong here too. The world says, do not need too much. Compassion says, needs are part of being alive. This does not mean becoming passive or dependent. Buddhism still values awareness, responsibility, and inner steadiness. But steadiness is not emotional starvation. Steadiness is the ability to remain connected to your humanity without drowning in shame about it. And shame has kept many people emotionally hungry for far too long. Hungry for comfort, hungry for gentleness, hungry for reassurance, hungry for safe closeness, hungry for permission to stop performing strength constantly. The tragedy is that many people are surrounded by potential love, but cannot absorb it because their nervous system still believes they must deserve every ounce of care. But love is not nourishment only for the perfect. Love is nourishment for the tired too, for the grieving too, for the confused too, for the emotionally overwhelmed too, for the unfinished too. And this includes you, even now, even during healing, even during struggle, even during emptiness. You do not need to become completely whole before allowing tenderness to reach you. You do not need to finish every inner battle before deserving support. You do not need to apologize every time someone chooses to care about you. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is simply receive. Receive the compliment, receive the help, receive the kindness, receive the rest, receive the moment of care without immediately trying to shrink yourself afterward. At first, this may feel unnatural, but over time your nervous system begins understanding something it perhaps never learned fully before. Love does not always need to be earned through suffering. Sometimes love arrives gently because your existence itself matters. And perhaps the deepest lesson hidden inside receiving is this: allowing yourself to be cared for does not make you weak. It makes you human. A human being finally learning that tenderness does not have to be paid for with exhaustion. A human being finally learning to stop apologizing for having a heart. A human being finally understanding that compassion was never meant to stop at everyone else and disappear before reaching them. You too deserve to be held gently by life sometimes, without guilt, without panic, without apology. And maybe, slowly, your tired soul can begin believing that. And when a person finally begins learning how to receive love without apologizing, another hidden truth slowly rises to the surface. Many people are not only afraid of being unloved, they are terrified of being abandoned once others see their ordinary human self beneath all the effort, usefulness, pleasing, and emotional performance. So they begin shaping themselves constantly around what they think will make people stay. This is where attachment quietly enters the heart and turns love into fear. And tonight, we are going to speak gently about how attachment makes you believe you must perform to be kept, because countless people are exhausted from acting lovable instead of simply allowing themselves to be loved. There is a painful kind of anxiety that follows people into relationships without them fully understanding why. They overthink small changes in tone. They panic when someone becomes distant. They replay conversations in their mind repeatedly. They study people's reactions carefully, trying to avoid saying the wrong thing, needing the wrong thing, or becoming the wrong version of themselves. From the outside, it may look like overthinking, but beneath it is usually fear. Fear that love is unstable, fear that affection disappears easily, fear that if they stop performing correctly, people will leave. This fear often begins long before adulthood. Some people grew up in environments where love felt inconsistent. One day there was warmth, another day there was distance. One moment there was praise, another moment there was criticism, withdrawal, silence, or emotional coldness. The child never fully understood what made love stay or disappear, so they became hyper-aware, hyper-careful, hyper-vigilant. they learn to study moods, to adjust quickly, to avoid mistakes, to become emotionally useful, to become agreeable, to become impressive, to become whatever version of themselves seemed safest in order to preserve connection. And over time, this survival strategy becomes attachment, not healthy connection, fear-based attachment. The Buddha taught that attachment creates suffering because attachment clings desperately to things it fears losing. A person attached to approval does not simply enjoy love, they anxiously monitor it. They become terrified of changes. Every interaction becomes emotionally loaded because they are not just seeking connection, they are seeking security. And security built on performance is always fragile, because no human being can perform perfectly forever. Eventually, exhaustion appears, authentic feelings appear, needs appear, limits appear, and the person begins fearing that these human realities will cost them love. So they perform harder. They become extra accommodating, extra patient, extra available, extra understanding, extra forgiving, extra emotionally manageable. They smile when hurt. They stay calm when overwhelmed. They hide jealousy, sadness, fear, disappointment, and anger because they secretly believe difficult emotions make them harder to keep. This is one of the quiet tragedies attachment creates. It convinces people they must become emotionally convenient to deserve connection. And after years of this, they no longer know whether people love the real them or the carefully controlled version designed to avoid abandonment. This creates enormous internal loneliness, because performing closeness is not the same as experiencing safety. A person can be deeply loved externally while still feeling internally terrified that one mistake could destroy everything. That fear changes behavior constantly. Some people overgive in relationships because they fear becoming forgettable. Some become perfectionists because they fear disappointment. Some suppress needs because they fear being too much. Some avoid conflict completely because they fear rejection more than dishonesty. Some become emotionally dependent because they cannot soothe their own fear of abandonment internally. All of these patterns grow from attachment mixed with insecurity. The mind becomes obsessed with maintaining connection at any cost, and eventually the self begins disappearing underneath all the performance. Buddhist wisdom asks us to observe attachment carefully because attachment often disguises itself as love while secretly creating suffering underneath. Love says, "I care about you deeply." Attachment says, "I need you to stay so I can feel safe." One feels spacious, the other feels desperate. One allows authenticity, the other pressures performance. This difference matters deeply because many people mistake emotional anxiety for love itself. They think obsession means depth. They think constant fear means passion. They think emotional instability means intimacy. But fear is not intimacy. Fear simply feels intense. Real love allows breathing room. Attachment creates constant emotional tension. You can often feel this tension physically. Tightness in the chest, anxiety while waiting for replies, panic during emotional distance, exhaustion from constantly monitoring another person's mood. The nervous system remains alert because attachment has convinced the mind that survival depends on maintaining connection perfectly. This is why attached people often struggle to relax fully inside relationships. Even during happy moments, part of them remains vigilant. Are they losing interest? Did I say something wrong? Am I still enough? What if they leave? The mind becomes trapped in constant emotional scanning, and this scanning becomes exhausting because the person is no longer simply existing naturally. They are managing impressions constantly. This is performance. Performance does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like pretending to be okay when you are hurt. Sometimes it looks like laughing at things that bother you. Sometimes it looks like always being easygoing, even while emotionally starving inside. Sometimes it looks like becoming smaller so others feel more comfortable, and many people become so skilled at this performance that even they forget they are doing it. They call it being loving. But inside, fear is driving everything. Fear that authenticity may lead to abandonment. Fear that honesty may make them undesirable. Fear that setting boundaries may make them harder to love. The Buddha taught that clinging creates suffering partly because clinging is rooted in illusion. One painful illusion is believing that love can only survive if you constantly control yourself into lovability. But authentic connection cannot grow where the self is constantly edited for survival. Eventually, something inside becomes tired, very tired, tired of pretending not to need reassurance, tired of over-explaining, tired of overthinking, tired of emotionally shape-shifting to fit what others prefer, tired of monitoring every interaction, tired of earning closeness through perfection. And this exhaustion often becomes the beginning of awakening, because the soul eventually realizes something important. If people only stay connected to your performance, then they never truly met you fully in the first place. That realization can feel painful, but also freeing, because it begins separating real love from attachment-driven survival. Real love does not require constant emotional acrobatics. Real love does not make you feel like your worth depends on endless emotional management. Real love does not disappear the moment you become imperfect, tired, emotional, uncertain, or human. Attachment, however, constantly fears loss, and fear transforms relationships into emotional tests. This is why attached people sometimes become addicted to validation. Compliments feel like temporary relief. Reassurance calms anxiety briefly. Attention feels soothing, but the calm never lasts long because attachment is not healed by external reassurance alone. The wound lives deeper. The wound says, "I am not safe unless I am constantly wanted." So even when love exists, fear continues. This is important to understand compassionately. People trapped in attachment are not weak or foolish. Most of them learned early that connection could disappear unpredictably. Their nervous system adapted for survival. They became hyper-attuned to emotional shifts because at some point in life, emotional shifts genuinely felt dangerous. Perhaps affection was withdrawn suddenly in childhood. Perhaps they experienced abandonment. Perhaps they were loved inconsistently. Perhaps they learned they had to earn attention through achievement, obedience, or emotional caretaking. So now, love feels unstable, conditional, temporary, something that must be carefully protected through performance. This creates enormous emotional pressure. The attached person may constantly ask themselves, how do I stay lovable? How do I prevent rejection? How do I avoid becoming unwanted? And without realizing it, they begin constructing a version of themselves designed entirely around keeping connection alive. This version may look impressive externally, helpful, understanding, successful, emotionally available, easygoing, but internally, the person may feel terrified of relaxing into authenticity, because authenticity risks disapproval, and attachment fears disapproval intensely. Buddhist practice encourages awareness because awareness allows us to notice when fear is controlling behavior. Without awareness, attachment patterns operate automatically. The person keeps performing without questioning why. They keep overgiving, keep over-explaining, keep self-abandoning, keep trying to become perfect enough to finally feel secure. But no level of perfection creates lasting emotional safety. Because the real wound was never about performance, it was about fear of abandonment. And fear of abandonment cannot fully heal through endless pleasing. It heals through deeper self-understanding, compassion, and learning that your worth exists independently from whether someone chooses to stay or leave. This is difficult wisdom, very difficult, because attached hearts often build identity around being chosen. Rejection feels catastrophic because it triggers old wounds of unworthiness. The mind immediately says, if they leave, it means I failed. But another person's departure does not automatically define your value. People leave for many reasons, sometimes because of their own wounds, sometimes because of incompatibility, sometimes because they are emotionally unavailable, sometimes because life changes, sometimes because they cannot meet you where you are. But attachment personalizes everything. It says, if I had been better, they would have stayed. This belief traps countless people in cycles of self-blame, and self-blame fuels even more performance. They think, next time I will be easier, more attractive, less needy, more useful, more patient, more perfect. But perfection is not the cure for abandonment fear. Compassion is. Compassion says, I understand why you became afraid. Compassion says, you learned to perform because you wanted safety. Compassion says, you are allowed to stop shape-shifting for survival. This softness matters because harshness only deepens attachment wounds. Many attached people already judge themselves relentlessly. They call themselves needy, emotional, weak, clingy, or broken. But beneath those labels is usually a frightened nervous system longing for consistency and care. Healing begins when you stop shaming the fear and start understanding it gently. Ask yourself honestly, when do you perform most intensely? Do you become extra helpful when afraid someone may leave? Do you become quieter when sensing disapproval? Do you suppress needs to appear easier to love? Do you overwork to feel worthy? Do you constantly try to become better so nobody abandons you? These questions reveal where attachment is shaping your identity, and awareness creates choice. Without awareness, fear keeps controlling the relationship silently. With awareness, you begin noticing when you are abandoning yourself to preserve connection. That noticing can feel heartbreaking at first. You realize how often you ignored your own truth just to avoid rejection. How often you tolerated discomfort silently. How often you changed yourself to maintain affection. How often you measured your worth by another person's consistency. But this realization is not meant to create shame. It is meant to create freedom. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you can begin loosening it gently. You can begin telling the truth more often. You can begin expressing needs honestly. You can begin allowing disagreement without panicking immediately. You can begin letting relationships reveal their real strength instead of constantly holding them together through performance alone. This is terrifying initially because attachment fears what authenticity might reveal. What if they leave when they see the real me? But another question matters too. What if constantly performing is preventing real love from reaching me fully? That question changes everything. Because real love cannot fully touch a masked self. If someone only experiences the edited version of you, then intimacy remains incomplete. True intimacy requires visibility, not flawless visibility, honest visibility, being seen tired, being seen uncertain, being seen emotional, being seen human, and surviving that visibility without abandonment begins healing attachment slowly. This does not mean every relationship becomes safe automatically. Some people truly are emotionally inconsistent. Some relationships genuinely are unhealthy. Buddhist wisdom does not encourage blind attachment to harmful situations, but it does encourage awareness of how fear shapes behavior. Fear says, become whatever keeps them here. Wisdom says, do not lose yourself trying to prevent every possible loss. This is profound because attachment often convinces people that losing connection would destroy them completely. But human beings are more resilient than fearful minds believe. Painful endings hurt deeply, yes. Loss hurts. Rejection hurts. Distance hurts. But self-abandonment hurts too. And many people spend years abandoning themselves slowly while trying desperately to keep others close. Eventually, the soul becomes exhausted from this negotiation, exhausted from trading authenticity for temporary emotional security, exhausted from performing worthiness constantly, exhausted from monitoring every emotional shift, exhausted from trying to become impossible versions of lovable. And perhaps this exhaustion itself becomes grace, because it pushes the person toward deeper truth. The truth that attachment built on fear cannot provide lasting peace. Only grounded self-worth can. Grounded self-worth changes relationships completely. A person with grounded self-worth still loves deeply, but they no longer believe they must erase themselves to maintain connection. They no longer perform endlessly to earn belonging. They no longer see every disagreement as evidence of abandonment. They begin understanding something important. Love cannot thrive where fear controls everything. Love needs honesty, breathing room, boundaries, authenticity, mutual respect, and most importantly, inner stability that does not collapse every time another person changes emotionally. This stability is not coldness. It is calm rootedness. It says, I can love you deeply without losing myself completely. That is mature love. Buddhism teaches non-attachment, not because connection is wrong, but because clinging creates suffering. Non-attachment does not mean emotional numbness. It means loving without making your entire identity dependent on controlling another person's presence. It means allowing relationships to breathe, allowing yourself to remain whole even during uncertainty, allowing your worth to exist independently from another person's choices. This is liberating, because once you stop performing constantly, something surprising happens. You begin discovering who you actually are beneath survival, your real preferences, your real emotions, your real limits, your real needs, your real voice. For some people, this feels unfamiliar at first because they spent years adapting themselves around others emotionally. But slowly, authenticity becomes safer than performance, and peace begins growing where anxiety once lived. The nervous system relaxes slightly, the constant emotional scanning softens, the obsession with being enough weakens, not instantly, gradually. Healing attachment is gradual because attachment formed over years. The body needs repeated experiences of safety, honesty, and self-compassion before it fully relaxes. There may still be moments of fear, moments of insecurity, moments where old performance patterns return automatically. That does not mean failure. It means you are human. The goal is not becoming perfectly unattached overnight. The goal is becoming aware enough to stop sacrificing your entire self at the altar of abandonment fear. And this awareness changes relationships profoundly. You stop asking, how do I keep them? And begin asking, can I remain honest while loving? You stop asking, how do I avoid rejection completely? And begin asking, can I stay connected to myself even during uncertainty? You stop asking, how do I become more lovable? And begin asking, why did I believe I needed constant performance to deserve love in the first place? That last question often opens deep healing, because many people eventually realize they were never performing for love alone. They were performing for safety, for survival, for protection from old wounds. And once that truth is seen compassionately, the nervous system can slowly stop fighting so hard. The performance softens, the mask loosens, the breath deepens, and the heart begins understanding a quieter truth. You do not need to audition endlessly for your place in love. You do not need to become emotionally flawless to deserve closeness. You do not need to constantly earn your right to stay connected. You are allowed to exist imperfectly without fearing immediate abandonment every time. This does not mean everyone will stay forever. Impermanence remains part of life. But your worth does not disappear simply because someone leaves. Your value is deeper than another person's capacity to remain, and perhaps that is one of the most healing truths Buddhism offers the attached heart. You are already whole beneath the fear, already worthy beneath the performance, already deserving of love beneath all the exhausting effort to become keepable. You do not need to spend your entire life shape-shifting to prevent loss. You do not need to perform endlessly to prove you deserve tenderness. Real love does not require you to erase yourself to survive it. Real love allows you to breathe. And perhaps, slowly, your tired heart can begin learning how to breathe again too. And once the heart begins understanding that it does not have to perform endlessly to be kept, another difficult truth slowly appears. Many people are not only afraid of abandonment, they are afraid of surrendering control long enough to let another human being truly support them. Somewhere deep inside, they still believe that depending on others is dangerous, weak, shameful, or emotionally unsafe. So even when help arrives, they hesitate. Even when compassion reaches toward them, they pull back. Even when their soul is exhausted, they still whisper, "I can handle it." And tonight, we are going to speak gently about the compassion of letting yourself be helped, because some of the kindest people in the world are secretly collapsing under weights they were never meant to carry alone. There is a quiet kind of suffering that comes from always being the strong one. People admire you for it. They praise your resilience. They say things like, "You always handle everything so well." But what they do not see is the exhaustion hidden underneath that image. They do not see how many nights you sat alone trying to hold yourself together silently, because asking for help felt harder than suffering alone. Many people become addicted to self-reliance, not because it feels peaceful, but because it feels safer than vulnerability. If you do everything yourself, nobody can disappoint you. If you carry everything alone, nobody can let you down. If you never need anyone, nobody can reject your need. At least, that is what the wounded mind believes. But the cost of this emotional armor becomes very heavy over time. A person who never allows themselves to be helped slowly begins carrying life like a lonely mountain. From the outside, they appear stable. Inside, they feel isolated, overwhelmed, emotionally starved, and deeply tired. And the tragedy is that many people do not even realize they are refusing help anymore. The refusal has become automatic. Someone asks how they are doing. "I'm fine." Someone offers support. "It's okay, I got it." Someone notices their exhaustion. "I'm just tired, don't worry about me." These responses may sound harmless, but often they are protective walls built from old emotional wounds. Perhaps the person once asked for help and was ignored. Perhaps vulnerability was mocked. Perhaps their pain overwhelmed emotionally immature people around them. Perhaps they learned early that nobody was truly coming to help, so they stopped expecting support entirely. The Buddha taught that suffering increases when we resist reality instead of meeting it honestly. And one painful resistance many people carry is resistance to needing others at all. They resist their own humanity because humanity feels unsafe. But needing support is not failure. It is part of being alive. Even the body itself survives through interdependence. The lungs need air, the heart needs blood, the earth needs rain. Nothing living survives completely alone, yet wounded people often treat emotional independence as the highest form of strength. They tell themselves, "I should handle this myself." But why? Why must every wound be carried privately? Why must every burden become a silent test of endurance? Why must receiving care feel shameful? Often because the person secretly believes their pain is their responsibility alone. They fear becoming emotionally heavy for others. They fear inconvenience. They fear rejection. They fear appearing weak. So instead of allowing support, they quietly overfunction until their body and spirit begin breaking down. And sometimes the breakdown becomes unavoidable. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed. The mind becomes exhausted. The body becomes depleted. The soul becomes numb. Still, many people continue saying, "I'm okay." not because they are okay, because they no longer know how to let themselves be held gently. This is why allowing help becomes an act of compassion toward yourself, not selfishness, compassion. Compassion says, I matter enough not to suffer alone unnecessarily. Compassion says, my pain deserves care too. Compassion says, I do not need to earn support through collapse. Many people wait until they are completely destroyed before accepting help. They push themselves past healthy limits repeatedly because they believe their suffering is not serious enough yet. They compare themselves to others constantly. Other people have it worse. I should be stronger. I should handle this better. But pain is not a competition, and healing does not require you to reach absolute breaking point before deserving tenderness. Buddhist wisdom teaches awareness partly because awareness notices when the mind is being unnecessarily cruel. A compassionate mind sees exhaustion and responds with gentleness. A wounded mind sees exhaustion and responds with shame. This difference changes everything. A compassionate mind says, you need support. A wounded mind says, you are failing. Many people have lived so long inside self-judgment that they no longer recognize compassion when it appears. They distrust kindness automatically. They suspect hidden expectations behind care. They fear becoming dependent. They fear owing something emotionally. This fear often comes from experiences where help was transactional. Maybe someone used support to control them later. Maybe kindness came with guilt attached. Maybe vulnerability was later weaponized against them. So now the nervous system treats receiving help as emotional danger. Even when safe people appear, the body stays guarded. This is important to understand because healing requires patience here. A person who survived through hyper-independence cannot suddenly relax overnight. Their body has been trained for survival, not surrender. And surrender feels terrifying. Not surrender as weakness, surrender as honesty. Honesty that says, I cannot carry all of this alone. That sentence may sound simple, but for some people, it feels almost impossible to speak aloud. Because asking for help requires letting another person see your limits. And wounded people often believe their limits make them less lovable, so they hide them. They continue performing strength long after the soul has become exhausted. But eventually, the body begins speaking what the mouth refuses to say. Anxiety, burnout, emotional numbness, depression, chronic fatigue, resentment. These are often not just random symptoms. Sometimes they are the body crying out for support after years of unsupported survival. The Buddha understood suffering deeply. He did not tell people to deny pain. He told them to face it with awareness and compassion. Compassion includes accepting that human beings need each other sometimes. This does not mean unhealthy dependence. It means allowing connection, allowing support, allowing care to move toward you without immediately pushing it away. This is difficult for people who built identity around being the helper. The helper often feels valuable while giving, but uncomfortable while receiving. Giving creates control. Receiving creates exposure. When you help others, you stay in the stronger position. When you allow yourself to be helped, you reveal tenderness. And tenderness scares wounded hearts, because tenderness remembers old disappointments. Still, there is something deeply healing about being supported honestly. Not because support removes all pain instantly, but because safe support reminds the nervous system that suffering does not always need to happen alone. A hand held gently during grief changes something. A patient conversation during emotional collapse changes something. Someone bringing you food when you are exhausted changes something. Someone listening without trying to fix you immediately changes something. These moments matter more than people realize, not because they solve life completely, because they interrupt loneliness, and loneliness becomes dangerous when suffering is already heavy. Some people are not only carrying pain, they are carrying the belief that they must carry pain silently to deserve respect. This belief destroys people slowly. It turns vulnerability into shame. It turns exhaustion into secrecy. It turns emotional honesty into fear. And eventually, the person becomes emotionally unreachable, even while desperately craving connection. Buddhist compassion softens this hardness slowly. It says, you are allowed to need help without becoming less worthy. It says, being supported does not erase your strength. It says, you do not become a burden because you are struggling. This last truth matters deeply. Many people refuse help because they fear burdening others. They would rather suffer privately than risk feeling emotionally heavy. They apologize constantly, minimize their pain constantly, handle crises alone constantly. But refusing support does not always protect relationships. Sometimes it prevents intimacy from growing, because intimacy requires mutual humanity, mutual trust, mutual care. If one person always gives and never receives, emotional imbalance develops eventually. The relationship becomes centered around performance rather than genuine closeness. Real closeness requires allowing others to witness your humanity too, not just your competence, not just your strength, not just your calmness, your humanity, your tiredness, your confusion, your grief, your uncertainty, and surviving that visibility can become profoundly healing. Many people secretly believe that if others truly saw how overwhelmed they feel inside, they would leave. But safe people often move closer during honesty, not farther away. This does not mean everyone will respond perfectly. Some people lack emotional maturity. Some people are uncomfortable with vulnerability because they never learned how to hold pain compassionately. But that does not mean your need for support is wrong. The Buddha never taught self-isolation as enlightenment. He taught compassion, awareness, interconnection, community. Even monks practice together in sanghas because human beings grow differently when surrounded by mindful support. Isolation may feel safer temporarily, but prolonged isolation hardens the heart. It convinces people they must survive every difficulty alone. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion so deep that even kindness starts feeling unfamiliar. You can see this in people who become visibly uncomfortable when someone helps them. They insist on carrying everything themselves, even while struggling physically or emotionally. They panic if others spend money on them. They reject compliments. They dismiss concern quickly, not because they are arrogant, because receiving feels emotionally unsafe. This is why learning to let yourself be helped requires retraining the nervous system slowly. Small acts matter, allowing someone to listen fully, allowing someone to help without immediate repayment, allowing yourself to say, "I'm having a hard time," allowing someone to sit beside you while you cry, allowing care without turning it into debt. These small moments begin teaching the body something new. Support does not always end in humiliation. That lesson can change an entire life, because many people have spent years trapped inside emotional survival mode. They became hyper-capable because capability protected them from disappointment. But capability without softness eventually becomes loneliness. There is no prize for suffering alone forever. There is no spiritual award for emotional starvation. There is no enlightenment hidden inside refusing every form of support until collapse. Sometimes the wisest thing a person can do is let another human being help carry the weight for a moment. This requires humility too. Humility says, "I am human enough to need support sometimes." Pride often says the opposite. Pride says, "I should not need anyone," but Buddhist wisdom gently dissolves pride because pride often hides fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of weakness, fear of rejection. True peace is softer. True peace allows interdependence without shame. It allows someone to care for you without feeling like your dignity disappeared. And dignity does not disappear through receiving help. In fact, sometimes dignity deepens through honesty. A person honestly admitting, "I need support right now," may actually be more emotionally courageous than someone pretending endlessly that everything is under control. Pretending is exhausting. Truth is freeing. Not easy, but freeing. This freedom becomes especially important during difficult life seasons. Illness, grief, burnout, depression, financial struggle, emotional collapse. These experiences reveal how fragile human control really is. Nobody remains endlessly strong forever. And when life humbles you, allowing support can become sacred. Not because dependence feels pleasant immediately, because support reminds you that your suffering matters too, that you are not invisible, that you are not abandoned completely, that your humanity deserves gentleness too. Many people cry the first time someone helps them without judgment because their nervous system expected criticism instead of compassion. This reveals how deprived they were emotionally. The body remembers tenderness deeply when it has gone without it for too long. Buddhist compassion asks us to become softer towards suffering, not harder. Yet many wounded people become extremely hard with themselves. They demand impossible strength. They criticize themselves for struggling. They treat emotional exhaustion like personal failure. This harshness blocks support because the person no longer believes they deserve care unless they have completely earned it. But compassion cannot flow into a heart that believes it must constantly justify its pain. At some point, you must stop asking whether your suffering is serious enough before deserving support. If you are hurting, that matters. If you are exhausted, that matters. If you are overwhelmed, that matters. Not because you are weak, because you are alive. And living beings require care sometimes. One of the most painful illusions modern culture teaches is that needing help makes someone less respectable. But some of the strongest moments in life involve allowing yourself to stop pretending, allowing yourself to say, "I can't do this alone right now." That honesty creates connection, because many people around you are secretly carrying the same fear, the fear of appearing weak, the fear of burdening others, the fear of being emotionally needy. When one person speaks honestly, it often gives others permission to stop performing too. This is compassion spreading naturally, not through perfection, through honesty. The Buddha often emphasized the middle path because extremes create suffering. Total emotional dependence creates suffering, but extreme emotional isolation creates suffering too. Balance matters. Healthy support matters. Healthy interdependence matters. Knowing when to carry yourself and when to let others walk beside you matters. And perhaps this is one reason healing feels so emotional sometimes. A person who survived by carrying everything alone suddenly experiences safe support, and the nervous system finally relaxes enough to feel how tired it truly was. That release may look like tears, not weakness, release. Release from years of emotional armor, release from constant vigilance, release from pretending everything was manageable. And this release can become deeply transformative because it teaches the body that softness does not always end in pain. Some people have not experienced softness safely in years, not emotionally, not relationally, not spiritually. So they become brittle internally, rigid, hyper-independent, over-controlled, always bracing for disappointment. But healing softens rigidity slowly. The shoulders unclench slightly, the breathing deepens slightly, the constant self-protection weakens slightly, and life begins feeling less like solitary survival and more like shared humanity. This does not mean becoming helpless. Buddhism never encourages abandoning responsibility for your own inner life. But there is a profound difference between responsibility and isolation. Responsibility says, "I will care for myself honestly." Isolation says, "I must survive everything alone." One is healthy, the other slowly empties the spirit. The compassion of letting yourself be helped begins when you stop treating support as evidence of failure. It begins when you stop measuring your worth by how little you need from others. It begins when you understand that needing care during painful seasons does not erase your dignity. You are not less wise because you need comfort, not less spiritual because you feel overwhelmed, not less lovable because you require support, not less strong because life became heavy. The tree bending during storm is not weak. It is surviving wisely. And perhaps you too are allowed to bend sometimes instead of forcing yourself to remain emotionally rigid forever. Because rigidity may protect temporarily, but softness heals. Softness says, I trust this moment enough to stop fighting support. Softness says, I will let someone care about me. Softness says, I do not have to carry every burden in silence. That softness is sacred, not fragile. Sacred. Because many people spend their whole lives offering compassion outward while refusing it inward. They become safe places for everyone except themselves. But Buddhist wisdom gently reminds us that compassion must include the self too. You are not excluded from kindness, not excluded from support, not excluded from tenderness, not excluded from care, even now, especially now. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson hidden inside letting yourself be helped. Allowing support does not weaken your spirit. Sometimes it is exactly what allows your spirit to keep living without collapsing under unbearable weight. You were never meant to become emotionally invincible. You were meant to become fully human, a human being capable of loving others deeply while also allowing love to reach them too. A human being capable of strength without denying softness. A human being capable of wisdom without rejecting tenderness. A human being finally learning that receiving compassion does not make them selfish, weak, or burdensome. It makes them alive. And maybe, slowly, your tired heart can begin trusting that truth enough to stop carrying everything alone. And after learning the compassion of letting yourself be helped, another quiet fear often begins revealing itself underneath the surface. Many people are not only afraid of needing support, they are afraid that exhaustion itself makes them undesirable. They secretly believe they are easiest to love when they are energetic, productive, emotionally available, cheerful, strong, and endlessly capable. So the moment tiredness appears, shame appears with it. And tonight, we are going to sit gently beside one of the deepest hidden fears many people carry, the fear that being tired makes them less worthy of love. There is a kind of exhaustion that changes how a person sees themselves, not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. The person begins moving through life more slowly. Messages become harder to answer. Smiling takes more effort. Social interaction becomes draining. Even simple responsibilities start feeling heavy. And during those moments, something painful often happens inside the mind. The person begins apologizing for their tiredness, not always out loud, internally. They start thinking, I'm not as fun anymore. I'm not as useful anymore. I'm not giving enough. I'm becoming difficult to love. This fear quietly destroys many people from the inside because they no longer allow themselves to rest peacefully. Instead of treating exhaustion like a signal that compassion is needed, they treat it like evidence of failure. But tiredness is not moral failure, it is human reality. The Buddha understood deeply that human beings suffer not only because pain exists, but because they resist pain with shame and self-judgment. Tiredness itself is already difficult, but when the mind adds, you are becoming less lovable because of this, suffering multiplies. Many people have lived so long in performance mode that they only feel valuable when functioning at full capacity. They believe love must constantly be maintained through energy, usefulness, emotional availability, beauty, productivity, or positivity. So when exhaustion arrives, panic follows, because tiredness threatens the identity they built to remain worthy. This is especially true for people who became emotionally useful early in life. Maybe you became the helper, the responsible one, the comforting one, the achiever, the strong one, the dependable one. Your identity became connected to what you could provide. So now, when your energy disappears, you feel like your value disappears too. This creates enormous inner pressure. Even while exhausted, you may still force yourself to overperform emotionally because deep inside you fear what will happen if others see how tired you truly are. You continue replying quickly even when drained. Continue showing up even when depleted. Continue smiling even when empty. Continue giving even when your spirit quietly begs for rest. And eventually, exhaustion becomes deeper because the body is not only carrying tiredness, it is carrying fear. Fear that slowing down will make you forgettable. Fear that rest will make you disappointing. Fear that people only loved the energetic version of you. This fear is heartbreaking because it teaches people to hide their exhaustion instead of honoring it. You can see it everywhere. People saying, "I'm fine," while barely functioning. People laughing while emotionally collapsing internally. People continuing to help everyone else while secretly hoping someone notices how tired they are without them having to ask. And perhaps the saddest part is this: many exhausted people still feel guilty for resting. They rest physically while mentally attacking themselves the entire time. You should be doing more. You're becoming lazy. Other people handle more than this. Why can't you just push harder? This inner harshness prevents true restoration because the nervous system never fully relaxes. The body lies down, but the mind keeps whipping the soul relentlessly. Buddhist compassion offers a completely different approach. It asks, what if your tiredness deserves gentleness instead of punishment? That question changes everything. Because many people have never considered the possibility that exhaustion might deserve care rather than shame. They only know how to judge themselves for needing breaks, judge themselves for emotional fatigue, judge themselves for burnout, judge themselves for not being as available as before, judge themselves for becoming quieter, slower, softer, or more withdrawn during difficult seasons. But the human spirit was never designed to operate endlessly without rest. Even nature rests. The ocean has tides. The earth has seasons. The moon disappears partially before becoming full again. Trees stand bare during winter without apologizing for it. Only human beings believe they must remain constantly productive and emotionally radiant to deserve love. This belief becomes especially dangerous in relationships. Many tired people begin fearing they are becoming emotionally unattractive because they no longer have the energy to perform happiness constantly. They think, "I'm too drained lately. I'm not exciting anymore. I don't have much to give. I'm becoming emotionally heavy." And because of these fears, they often isolate themselves further, not because they want distance, because they are afraid their exhaustion will burden others. This is important to understand compassionately. Exhausted people are often not avoiding connection because they do not care. They are avoiding connection because they feel ashamed of needing softness while having little energy to offer in return. They begin believing love must always be reciprocal in equal amounts every moment. If I cannot give fully right now, maybe I should disappear. But healthy love does not function like a business contract. Real love understands seasons. Some seasons you carry more, some seasons you receive more, some seasons you are energetic, some seasons you barely survive, and your worth does not vanish during any of them. This is deeply aligned with Buddhist understanding of impermanence. Everything changes, energy changes, mood changes, capacity changes, identity changes. The problem begins when the mind mistakes temporary exhaustion for permanent unworthiness. A tired person is not broken. A tired person is tired. That distinction matters profoundly, because once exhaustion becomes identity, hopelessness begins growing. The person stops saying, "I need rest," and starts saying, "I am useless." Stops saying, "I'm overwhelmed," and starts saying, "I have nothing left worth loving." This is how suffering deepens psychologically, not through exhaustion alone, through identification with exhaustion. The Buddha often taught people to observe experiences without becoming fused with them completely. You can notice tiredness without concluding you have lost your value. You can experience burnout without deciding you are unlovable. You can feel emotionally empty without assuming nobody could still care for you meaningfully. But wounded minds struggle with this separation, especially if love was conditional earlier in life. Some people were only praised when productive, only noticed when useful, only valued when cheerful, only accepted when emotionally easy. So now exhaustion feels dangerous because it interrupts performance. And without performance, they fear abandonment. This fear silently drives countless people into chronic overexertion. They continue pushing themselves past healthy limits because stopping feels emotionally unsafe. Rest becomes terrifying. Not because rest itself is bad, because stillness exposes vulnerability. In stillness, the person feels how tired they actually are. In stillness, emotions rise. Loneliness rises. Grief rises. Fear rises. And perhaps most painfully, the realization rises that they spent years earning love through output rather than receiving love through simple existence. That realization can feel devastating at first, but it can also become liberating, because once you see the pattern clearly, healing becomes possible. You begin understanding that your exhaustion does not erase your humanity. You begin understanding that tired people still deserve tenderness. You begin understanding that slowing down does not make you less meaningful. This is difficult for people conditioned to associate worth with usefulness. They may genuinely believe they become harder to love when low energy, but often this belief says more about old wounds than current reality. Safe people do not stop caring because you become tired. Compassionate people do not withdraw love because you need rest. Mature love does not require endless emotional entertainment to survive. But wounded hearts expect abandonment automatically because they learned early that approval depended on performance. This creates a painful cycle. The person becomes exhausted, then ashamed of exhaustion, then afraid others will notice, then overperforms despite depletion, then becomes even more exhausted. Eventually, the nervous system begins collapsing under the pressure. Anxiety increases, numbness increases, resentment increases, disconnection increases. But instead of listening to the body compassionately, the person often pushes harder, because they fear becoming not enough. This is where Buddhist wisdom becomes deeply healing. Buddhism does not worship endless productivity. It values awareness, balance, and compassion. It recognizes that suffering intensifies when people fight reality instead of listening to it wisely. If the body is tired, forcing endless performance creates more suffering. If the spirit is exhausted, pretending everything is fine creates more suffering. If the heart is overwhelmed, suppressing vulnerability creates more suffering. Compassion begins with honesty. Honesty says, "I am tired, not weak, not worthless, tired." That simple distinction can soften enormous amounts of shame, because tiredness is not a character flaw. It is not proof you failed spiritually, not proof you are becoming lazy, not proof you are less lovable. Sometimes it is simply evidence that you have carried too much for too long without enough gentleness. Many people have normalized chronic exhaustion because they live inside cultures that glorify overworking, overgiving, overproducing, and emotionally overfunctioning. The exhausted person is praised for pushing through, but rarely does anyone ask, at what cost? At what cost are you constantly overriding your body? At what cost are you denying your need for restoration? At what cost are you pretending strength while collapsing internally? Eventually, the soul reaches a point where it can no longer survive through force alone. And this moment often feels frightening because the person can no longer maintain the old performance identity. They cannot keep smiling endlessly, cannot keep carrying everyone emotionally, cannot keep functioning at unsustainable levels. So they begin fearing love itself may disappear. But real love often becomes clearer during tired seasons, because exhaustion reveals which connections are built on performance and which are built on genuine care. Some people only enjoy the version of you that entertains, helps, gives, performs, or produces constantly. Others stay gentle when your energy disappears. That difference matters very deeply, because love rooted only in usefulness will always feel fragile. But love rooted in compassion allows humanity, allows difficult seasons, allows quietness, allows emotional fatigue, allows rest. This is one reason tired people need self-compassion desperately. Without self-compassion, exhaustion becomes soaked in shame, and shame blocks healing. A person ashamed of their tiredness cannot truly rest because internally they believe rest must be earned. But rest is not a reward for collapse. Rest is part of being alive. The Buddha understood the middle path partly because extremes destroy balance. Endless striving without restoration creates suffering. Endless self-neglect creates suffering. The body and spirit require rhythm, activity and stillness, giving and receiving, movement and rest. This rhythm is natural, but wounded people often fight natural rhythms because they fear what rest says about them. They fear appearing lazy, fear appearing emotionally difficult, fear losing admiration, fear losing identity, especially if they were once highly productive, social, energetic, or emotionally giving. Exhaustion then feels like personal failure instead of natural depletion. But you are not a machine. You are not designed for endless output. You are not spiritually superior because you ignore your limits. In fact, wisdom often begins where denial ends. Wisdom says, I cannot continue living as though my body and soul are disposable. This realization changes how you relate to tiredness. Instead of attacking yourself immediately, you begin listening. What has exhausted me so deeply? What have I been carrying silently? What needs have I ignored for too long? What pain have I minimized? What pressure am I placing on myself constantly? These questions reveal that exhaustion often has emotional roots too. Some people are not only physically tired, they are tired from people-pleasing, tired from emotional suppression, tired from pretending, tired from hypervigilance, tired from overthinking, tired from surviving relationships where they never felt fully safe, tired from trying endlessly to prove worthiness. This kind of exhaustion reaches the soul, and soul-level exhaustion cannot heal through productivity. It heals through compassion, through honesty, through gentleness, through slowing down enough to stop abandoning yourself internally. Many people fear softness because softness feels unproductive, but softness is often where healing begins. A soft conversation, a soft place to rest, a soft voice replacing inner cruelty, a soft moment of admitting, I cannot keep doing this to myself. That softness matters profoundly, because tired people are often starving for permission to stop fighting themselves constantly, permission to breathe, permission to rest, permission to exist without performing cheerfulness every second, permission to not have everything together. And perhaps the deepest healing comes when someone finally realizes this. Being exhausted does not erase your right to love, not from others, not from yourself. You do not become emotionally disposable because life became heavy. You do not lose your beauty because your spirit became tired. You do not stop mattering because your energy changed. In fact, tiredness often reveals how much tenderness a person truly deserves. A person carrying invisible pain deserves gentleness. A person surviving burnout deserves gentleness. A person emotionally overwhelmed deserves gentleness, not criticism, not shame. Gentleness. This is difficult for perfectionistic minds to accept. Perfectionism often says, only the strongest version of me deserves admiration. But compassion says, every version of you deserves care, including the exhausted one. That sentence can feel emotional because many people secretly hate themselves most during low-energy seasons. They feel embarrassed by their slowness, ashamed of their emotional fatigue, frustrated by their limits. But your limits are not proof of failure. Limits are part of being human. And the people capable of real love understand this. Real love does not disappear because you become quieter. It does not vanish because you need rest. It does not punish you for being emotionally overwhelmed. It does not demand endless brightness from a tired soul. Instead, real love often moves closer during exhaustion, closer with patience, closer with understanding, closer with compassion. And perhaps one reason many people struggle to believe this is because they have never experienced love that allowed tiredness safely before. Maybe previous relationships only celebrated the productive version of them. Maybe they were expected to stay emotionally available constantly. Maybe vulnerability was treated like inconvenience. So now they automatically expect rejection during difficult seasons. But not everyone leaves when you become tired. Not everyone needs constant performance from you. Not everyone measures your value through your output. And perhaps the greatest act of self-compassion is finally allowing yourself to stop measuring your own value that way too. You are not more worthy on energetic days than exhausted ones. Not more deserving of kindness when productive. Not more lovable when smiling constantly. Not more meaningful when over-functioning. Your humanity remains valuable through every season, even now, especially now. The tired version of you still deserves tenderness, still deserves rest, still deserves patience, still deserves understanding, still deserves love. And perhaps slowly your heart can begin believing that exhaustion is not evidence that you have become too difficult to keep. Perhaps it is simply evidence that you have been carrying life bravely for too long without enough softness around your spirit. And maybe, instead of punishing yourself for being tired, you can finally place a hand gently over your own heart and whisper something different. You do not need to earn rest. You do not need to apologize for exhaustion. You do not become less worthy because your soul needs time to breathe. Because being tired does not make you less lovable, it makes you human, and humans deserve compassion, especially when they are weary. Tonight you were reminded of something the wounded mind often forgets. Your worth was never created by how useful you are, how productive you are, how strong you appear, or how much you can give to others before collapsing. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the rejection, beneath the fear of being a burden, there is still a human soul worthy of compassion, rest, connection, and love. You learned that tiredness does not make you less lovable. Empty seasons do not define your identity. Rejection is not proof of unworthiness. And real love was never meant to feel like a performance you must maintain every second just to be kept. The Buddha taught that suffering begins to loosen the moment we stop fighting our humanity with shame. And perhaps tonight, for the first time in a long time, part of your heart finally felt permission to stop proving itself endlessly. Maybe healing will not happen all at once. Maybe some wounds will still ache tomorrow. But something important has already changed. You are beginning to see yourself with softer eyes. And sometimes that is where real transformation quietly begins. Before you leave, I want you to do something simple but powerful. Go into the comments and finish this sentence honestly. Tonight, I realized that You never know who may read your words and finally feel less alone in their own pain. And if this message helped your heart breathe a little softer tonight, subscribe to the channel. We are building a space here for healing, peace, self-worth, and the kind of wisdom that helps tired souls feel human again.